My name is Naomi, 38 years old. After my husband died, his entitled children looked me in the eye and demanded his entire estate, his business, and every dime we had built together. My lawyer begged me to fight them in court, but I looked at their greedy faces and said they could have it all. Everyone thought I had lost my mind handing over a multi-million-dollar empire without a single argument. What those spoiled kids did not realize was that I was not giving them a fortune. I was handing them a $45 million ticking time bomb. At the final hearing, I signed every document while they smiled with pure satisfaction. But that smugness vanished the second their lawyer read one single hidden sentence in the file and turned pale as a ghost. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever handed your enemies exactly what they asked for, just to watch them destroy themselves with it. The air in my Buckhead mansion was thick with white lilies and expensive cologne. It was the afternoon of my husband Desmond's repast. We had just laid him to rest. Desmond was a self-made millionaire who built legacy holdings from the ground up. He was my partner and the love of my life. I was still wearing my black morning dress, my eyes swollen from crying, but I wanted to honor his roots. I had spent the morning cooking a huge tray of traditional Southern fried chicken and baked macaroni and cheese. It was the meal his grandmother used to make for him back when he had nothing. I walked into the grand living room carrying the heavy silver tray, hoping to offer some comfort to the guests. Before I could even set it on the dining table, Desmond's 32-year-old son Tavon stepped in front of me. He wore a custom-tailored suit paid for by his father's credit card and held a glass of Desmond's most expensive vintage cognac. Without a word of warning, Tavon swung his arm and slapped the heavy silver tray right out of my hands. The crash echoed through the massive room. Golden fried chicken and macaroni scattered across the imported Persian rug. The entire room went dead silent. "Take that cheap food back to the kitchen," Tavon sneered, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "We just catered butter-poached lobster and truffle risotto from a 5-star restaurant. You think you are still surviving in the Zone 6 projects, Naomi?" I stood frozen, staring at the ruined food on the floor. My hands were shaking not from fear but from a profound, deep-seated rage. Across the room, Tavon's 29-year-old sister, Kiara, was leaning against the grand piano. She was adjusting her designer sunglasses and holding her phone high in the air, live streaming the funeral gathering to her followers. She squeezed out a single fake tear for the camera, wearing a sheer black dress she had bought using her father's business account just hours after he passed away. She did not even flinch when her brother assaulted me. Instead, she turned her camera away and whispered to her phone that the hired help was making a mess. I took a slow, deep breath, trying to maintain the grace my husband always admired in me. "Tavon," I said, keeping my voice dangerously calm, "you are drunk, and you are disrespecting your father's house on the day we buried him. Tell your fraternity brothers to finish their drinks and leave. We are mourning family today, not throwing a club party." Tavon took a step closer to me, his breath reeking of expensive liquor. "Your house." He laughed, a harsh, mocking sound that made my stomach turn. "My dad is dead now. You are nothing but a cheap gold digger who used your stupid little historically black college degree to hustle your way right into his bed. Tomorrow morning, my lawyer Sterling is reading the will. And the second he does, you are packing your cheap bags and getting out of my property." Before I could respond, a blur of motion rushed past me. My older sister Nia had seen the whole thing from the hallway. Nia was fiercely protective, a no-nonsense woman who did not care about the mansions or the luxury cars. She lunged at Tavon, her hand raised to slap the arrogance right off his face. "You disrespectful little punk," Nia shouted. "I will drag you out of this house by your collar." I grabbed Nia by the arm, pulling her back with all my strength. "No, Nia," I whispered firmly. "Not today. Not in front of Desmond's friends." Jamal, my brother-in-law, stepped up quietly behind Nia. Jamal was a senior financial risk analyst, a man who rarely spoke but absorbed everything around him. He gently pulled his wife back, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. He looked at Tavon with an expression of pure pity, then looked at me and gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. We both knew the truth that Tavon was too blind to see. Tavin and Kiara had spent the last decade living off their father's wealth, flying to Dubai, buying luxury watches, and pretending they were business moguls. They never bothered to look at the actual paperwork. They did not know that 10 years ago, Legacy Holdings was drowning in debt and on the verge of total bankruptcy. Desmond had the vision, but he had over-leveraged his assets during the market crash. It was me who stepped in. I worked 80-hour weeks right by his side. I used my background in commercial real estate development to restructure his entire portfolio. I negotiated with ruthless contractors, fought off aggressive lenders, and rebuilt his empire from the ground up. I did not just marry Desmond. I saved his legacy while his children were busy spending it. But I did not say any of that to Tavon. I let him stand there puffing out his chest thinking he was the king of a castle he did not even know how to build. I looked down at the ruined food, then back up at his arrogant face. "Clean up this mess," Tavon, I said softly. "Because starting tomorrow, you are going to learn exactly how much it costs to run this family." I turned and walked away, my heels clicking against the hardwood floor. Nia and Jamal followed me up the grand staircase to the master suite. Once the heavy oak doors were closed, Nia began pacing the room, furious. "I cannot believe you stopped me," she fumed. "He knocked the food you made for his father onto the floor. He treated you like a maid in your own home." Jamal sat on the edge of the reading chair, loosening his tie. "Let the boy talk," Nia Jamal said smoothly. "Loud men usually have the weakest hands. Naomi knows exactly what she is doing." I walked over to the large bay window looking out over the manicured estate. My heart ached for Desmond, but seeing the pure malice in his children had ignited a cold, calculating survival instinct inside me. "They want a war," I said to my sister. "But they do not realize they do not even have weapons." I barely slept that night, my mind racing through the financial structures, the legal documents, and the upcoming will reading. The next morning, the Atlanta sun rose, bright and unforgiving. The house was quiet, the hangover from the previous nights, disrespect lingering in the air. Nia and Jamal had stayed over in the guest wing to support me. Knowing they preferred a simple, hearty breakfast, I grabbed my purse and decided to drive down to the local upscale grocery store to pick up some fresh ingredients. I needed the brief escape from the mansion anyway. At the checkout, I pulled out my debit card. The machine beeped, flashing a red error message. Declined. Tavon had frozen my accounts. The war had begun. I drove home. The drive back to the Buckhead mansion felt like navigating through a thick, suffocating fog. Tavon wanted to play a dirty game. He wanted to strip me of my resources, humiliate me, and throw me out into the street with nothing. I parked my car in the massive circular driveway and gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. He thought freezing my bank accounts would break me. I thought cutting off my access to Desmond's money would leave me helpless and desperate. But as I looked up at the towering stone facade of the mansion, a slow, determined smile spread across my face. Tavin was playing checkers, making loud, aggressive moves. He had no idea I was the one who designed the entire chessboard. Tavin had successfully frozen my bank accounts that morning, foolishly believing he had completely stripped away my financial power. The sleek downtown Atlanta office of Attorney Sterling smelled strongly of old money and fresh deceit. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of the busy city skyline, creating a stark visual contrast to the incredibly suffocating tension building inside the private conference room. I sat perfectly straight in a highly polished leather chair, refusing to show any weakness. My incredibly anxious lawyer Harrison sat tightly to my left, aggressively clicking his expensive metal pen. My fiercely protective sister Nia sat rigidly to my right, her strong arms tightly crossed over her chest, glaring at the other side intently. Beside her, my brother-in-law, Jamal, remained perfectly still, his calm eyes constantly scanning the large room while his steady hands rested quietly on his sleek digital tablet. Across the massive glass table sat Tavon and Kiara. They looked significantly less like grieving children and far more like hungry predators, eagerly waiting for a fresh meal. Kiara was already remarkably busy, taking a perfectly angled selfie for her large audience of social media followers, carefully making sure her very expensive designer morning outfit was clearly visible in the bright frame. Tavon leaned confidently back in his comfortable chair today. He wore a highly smug smile that instantly made my blood boil. At the exact head of the table firmly stood Attorney Sterling. He was a ruthless, deeply calculating corporate lawyer who had always bitterly resented my strong personal influence over Desmond and the massive company. "Let us officially begin this formal reading," Sterling announced loudly, his deep voice entirely devoid of any actual human sympathy. He slowly opened a thick black leather folder and dramatically pulled out a crisp, heavy stack of official legal documents. As you all surely know, Desmond formally updated his last will and testament. Recently, he signed it exactly 1 month ago. Harrison immediately slammed both his hands flat onto the thick glass table. "Table 1 month ago?" Harrison demanded angrily, his loud voice echoing sharply in the uncomfortably quiet room. Desmond was heavily medicated and completely bedridden inside the intensive care unit exactly 1 month ago. He absolutely lacked the basic cognitive capacity to properly sign any legally binding corporate documents. Sterling rudely ignored Harrison completely. He casually adjusted his expensive designer glasses and confidently began reading the specific terms of the newly amended will. According to this legally notarized, fully binding document, the late Desmond hereby firmly leaves 90% of his controlling shares in legacy holdings directly to his biological children, Tavon and Kiara. Furthermore, the primary Buckhead mansion, the entire fleet of expensive luxury vehicles, and all liquid corporate assets currently held in the primary accounts are also transferred immediately to his 2 children. The spacious room instantly went dead silent. Nia gripped the sharp edge of the glass table so incredibly hard, her knuckles turned completely white. I felt a sharp, extremely painful knot form deep inside my chest. They were maliciously stealing absolutely everything. 10 long years of my truly brutal, exhausting 80-hour work weeks were being erased. 10 hard years of fixing shattered contracts and successfully saving that exact company from absolute financial ruin meant nothing. Tavon and Kiara were forcefully snatching the entire corporate empire while bringing absolutely zero actual value to the heavy table. "And what about my client?" Harrison demanded loudly, pointing a highly accusing finger directly at Sterling. "What exactly does the legal widow receive after tirelessly building this massive empire right alongside him?" Sterling flipped slowly to the very last page of the thick document. A cruel, deeply mocking smile crept slowly today onto his pale face. "To my wife, Maya, I leave the secondary subsidiary formerly known as Apex Ventures." Tavon burst into loud, incredibly obnoxious laughter. He slapped the glass table hard, thoroughly enjoying the painful moment. "Apex Ventures." Tavon mocked loudly, his voice dripping with pure disdain. "That is that dusty, completely worthless shell company Dad used for cheap tax write-offs back in the day. It does not even hold a single active corporate contract. Congratulations, Maya. You are officially the proud owner of absolutely nothing. You can maybe use that garbage company to rent a cheap little dirty apartment back in your old struggling neighborhood. This entire document is a blatant, undeniable forgery," Harrison shouted passionately, standing quickly up from his leather chair. "I will firmly file an emergency legal injunction before the sun goes down today. I will fiercely drag every single one of you into a prolonged, incredibly messy legal battle. We will securely tie up legacy holdings in probate court for the next 10 long years if we truly have to. You will absolutely not see a single shiny dime of that corporate money until the highest court fully verifies the absolute authenticity of that highly suspicious signature." Tavon immediately stopped laughing. He slowly stood up confidently, buttoning his custom-tailored suit jacket. He glared intensely at Harrison, then quickly shifted his highly arrogant gaze directly to me. "Go ahead, and foolishly fight it." Maya Tavon challenged loudly, his harsh voice dripping with pure venom. "But let me clearly remind you exactly who you are dealing with today. I hold a highly prestigious degree from a top Ivy League university. I have the absolute best corporate lawyers in the entire state of Georgia sitting right here in this very room. What exactly do you realistically have? You have a completely useless historically black college degree and a loudmouth ghetto sister who does not even know how to properly stay in her place. Tavon then turned his aggressive attention to Jamal, who was still quietly tapping the bright screen of his digital tablet safely under the table. Tavon sneered in deep disgust. And seriously, look at your incredibly quiet little brother-in-law. Tavon mocked loudly, shaking his head. He just sits there blankly staring at his screen exactly, like a terrified little child. He knows you have absolutely no real power here today. You are completely outmatched. Maya, you always were nothing but temporary, easily replaceable hired help. Nia angrily jumped out of her chair, fully ready to physically launch herself across the wide glass table. I will happily show you exactly who is outmatched. You spoiled, arrogant little brat. Nia yelled furiously, her eyes blazing with protective fire. But before Nia could successfully move another inch forward, Jamal firmly grabbed her wrist. He did not raise his voice at all. He did not even look slightly angry. In fact, Jamal looked incredibly, unnervingly calm. He slowly raised his dark eyes from his sleek digital tablet and looked directly at me. Underneath the thick glass table, Jamal carefully reached over and firmly grabbed my hand. He squeezed my fingers exactly twice. It was a secret, deeply urgent signal. While Harrison and Sterling were extremely busy, loudly shouting legal threats at each other, and while Tevin was foolishly busy bragging about his highly expensive education, Jamal had quietly hacked directly into the master real estate registry for the entire city of Atlanta. As a highly experienced senior financial risk analyst, Jamal knew exactly how to quickly trace deeply hidden corporate assets. He had been quietly, meticulously searching for the exact legal status of that supposedly worthless shell company, Apex Ventures. Jamal leaned slightly over, bringing his face extremely close to my ear, so absolutely no one else could possibly hear him. His dark eyes were wide open, with a sudden, truly massive realization. Let them gladly take the company, Maya Jamal whispered very softly, his low voice actually trembling with intensely hidden excitement. I just carefully checked the master commercial registry online. They have absolutely no earthly idea what they just greedily swallowed. Apex Ventures is definitely not a worthless shell company. Just quietly sign the paper and let them happily hang themselves today. I stared blankly at Jamal, my heart suddenly pounding violently against my ribs. I trusted Jamal entirely with my very life. If he confidently said, Apex Ventures secretly held the absolute key to my ultimate survival, he was absolutely right. I forcefully forced my facial expression to remain completely neutral. I desperately needed to flawlessly play the exact role of the highly defeated, totally broken widow. I needed arrogant Tavon to truly believe he had crushed my spirit. Tavon snatched a heavy legal document from Sterling's hands and slammed it down onto the glass table in front of me. It was a formal legal waiver sign. Away your right to contest. Right now, Tavon demanded, leaning over the table to intimidate me. Or I will have the Fulton County Sheriff evict you and your ghetto sister from my Buckhead mansion tonight. You will not have a dime for a lawyer. I slowly reached out and picked up the pen. My hand was trembling, making Tavon smile, but my eyes remained extremely sharp. I took a deep breath and pressed the tip of the pen against the thick paper. I made sure my hand shook just enough to look authentic. I let out a soft, defeated sob, allowing a single tear to roll down my cheek and splash onto the legal document. Across the table, Tavon leaned back and let out a victorious laugh. He actually thought he had finally won. He genuinely believed he had broken me. Kiara did not try to hide her amusement. She pulled out her phone and started recording a video for her followers. She made sure to capture me wiping my eyes as I signed away my rights to contest the forged will. She typed a caption that read, "Getting justice for my dad," and hit send. I handed the signed document back to Attorney Sterling. He snatched it from my trembling hand with a greedy smile. "It is officially done," Sterling announced, sliding the important paperwork into his dark leather briefcase. "The Legacy Holdings empire and all associated assets now legally belong to Tavon and Kiara." Tavon stood up and buttoned his suit jacket. "You have exactly 1 hour to get all of your things out of my house, Maya," he ordered sharply. "I hired an armed security team to escort you. They are waiting for you at the Buckhead mansion right now. If you try to take anything that belongs to my family, they have orders to have you arrested for theft." Nia suddenly jumped out of her leather chair, her fists clenched tightly at her sides. She looked totally ready to physically tear arrogant Tavon apart. "One single hour," Nia shouted angrily. "Maya peacefully lived in that house for 10 long years. You cannot legally force her out in just 1 hour." Jamal quickly stood up and placed a firm, calming hand on Nia's shaking shoulder. "We do not need more than an hour," Jamal said quietly. His voice was incredibly smooth and completely undisturbed by Tavon's extremely arrogant threats. "Maya has absolutely everything she needs. Let us go." We left the downtown Atlanta law office and quickly drove straight back to the Buckhead mansion. When we finally pulled up to the massive iron gates, 4 large security guards in dark uniforms were standing actively on the front porch. They carefully watched me with cold, highly suspicious eyes as I slowly unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The house already felt entirely different. It no longer felt like the warm, loving home I had beautifully shared with Desmond. It felt exactly like a hostile territory currently occupied by greedy, heartless strangers. I walked quickly up the grand staircase to the master bedroom and began rapidly throwing my personal clothes into a simple black suitcase. Nia angrily tossed my shoes into a heavy duffel bag, loudly muttering under her breath about how horribly unfair this entire legal situation was. Jamal stood very quietly by the bedroom door, carefully keeping a close, vigilant eye on the armed security guards, who were hovering obtrusively out in the hallway. Just as I was finally zipping up my very last suitcase, Kiara slowly strolled into the bedroom. She was casually sipping a green healthy smoothie and actively looking around the master suite as if she was already planning exactly how to totally redecorate it. Her eyes suddenly locked firmly onto my neck. "Take off the expensive necklace," Maya, Kiara demanded, pointing a perfectly manicured finger directly at my chest. I paused, my hand instinctively reaching up to gently touch the cool, beautiful diamonds resting against my collarbone. Desmond had lovingly given me this beautiful diamond necklace for our 5th wedding anniversary. It was truly one of my most cherished personal possessions, a powerful symbol of our unwavering love during the absolute hardest years of rebuilding his massive company. "That necklace was purchased entirely with my rich father's money," Kiara sneered, stepping dangerously closer. "Therefore, it legally belongs completely to the corporate estate. Take it off right now, or I will happily have the security guards violently strip it off you." Nia loudly slammed a suitcase shut and bravely stepped in front of me, her dark eyes flashing with pure, unadulterated rage. "Do not you ever dare touch her," Nia warned dangerously. I gently pushed my highly protective sister aside. I definitely did not want to cause a physical altercation that would gladly give them an excuse to quickly involve the local police. I calmly reached behind my neck, softly unclasped the heavy diamond necklace, and let it fall beautifully into the palm of my hand. I looked directly at Kiara, feeling absolutely nothing but profound, deep pity for the shallow, incredibly empty woman standing right in front of me. I steadily held my hand out and dropped the sparkling diamonds directly into her extremely greedy palm. "You can happily keep it, Kiara," I said, my voice completely steady and entirely devoid of any emotion. "You desperately need the bright sparkle to fully hide the massive dark emptiness inside your terrible soul." Kiara fiercely glared at me, tightly clutching the incredibly expensive jewelry, but she could not quickly think of a single clever response. I successfully picked up my heavy suitcase and confidently walked right past her. But right before permanently leaving the huge mansion forever, I had one final, truly crucial task to swiftly complete. I calmly told the armed security guards I desperately needed to grab my personal passport from Desmond's home office downstairs. They closely followed me, their hands resting cautiously on their black utility belts. I stepped slowly into the dark, beautiful mahogany-paneled office. The heavy, familiar scent of Desmond's favorite expensive cigars still lingered softly in the air. My broken heart ached for a brief, agonizing second, but I quickly pushed the immense grief aside. I walked directly over to the massive wooden desk where Desmond and I had spent countless late, sleepless nights meticulously reviewing commercial real estate contracts and actively saving his business from total financial ruin. I cleverly pretended to trip slightly on the raised edge of the thick decorative rug. As I clumsily stumbled forward, I successfully caught myself against the firm edge of the large desk. In one incredibly swift, completely unnoticeable motion, I smoothly slid my hand underneath the heavy wooden drawer. My agile fingers brushed lightly against a small, cleverly concealed compartment we had built years ago. I felt the cool, smooth metal of an encrypted data USB drive. I quickly pulled it loose and slipped it seamlessly deep into the pocket of my black jacket. The security guards did not notice a single suspicious thing. They just aggressively told me to hurry up and get out. I quickly grabbed my passport from the top drawer and turned completely away from the desk. I was finally absolutely ready to leave. Nia, Jamal, and I walked bravely out the grand front doors of the Buckhead mansion for the very last time. The armed guards slammed the heavy wooden doors shut right behind us, aggressively locking us outside. We walked slowly down the long paved driveway and climbed directly into a modest, cheap Uber that Jamal had called. The driver pulled quickly away permanently, leaving the sprawling, luxurious estate far behind us in the rearview mirror. Nia sat quietly in the back seat, furiously wiping away her extremely angry tears. "I cannot possibly believe they just viciously kicked you out like a useless stray dog," Nia cried loudly. "You fully gave 10 hard years of your absolute best life to that ungrateful, terrible family. You successfully built that entire massive empire with your own bare hands." I sat completely silent, peacefully watching the busy Atlanta streets pass rapidly by through the tinted window of the moving car. We finally safely arrived at a small, cramped, cheap apartment complex on the completely other side of the busy city. It was a modest, very temporary place Jamal had quickly rented for us to safely stay in while we heavily regrouped. We carried our few heavy bags up the narrow, dirty concrete stairs and finally unlocked the cheap wooden door. The tiny apartment was incredibly small, smelling faintly of harsh bleach and very old carpet. It was a drastic, shocking, unbelievable change from the beautiful $5 million mansion we had just recently left. Nia dropped her heavy bags directly onto the floor and let out a long, totally exhausted sigh. But smart Jamal did not look tired or completely defeated at all. I immediately walked straight over to the small kitchen table, quickly opened his sleek black laptop, and sat comfortably down. He looked up at me with a brilliant, highly knowing smile. I walked slowly over to him, reached deep into my dark jacket pocket, and proudly pulled out the small metal USB drive I had successfully smuggled out of Desmond's office. I confidently handed it directly to Jamal. He eagerly plugged the highly encrypted drive directly into his computer. A bright prompt suddenly appeared on the screen, asking for a highly complex secure digital password. I carefully typed in the highly specific secret sequence of numbers and letters Desmond and I had secretly agreed upon several years ago. The bright screen blinked twice, and then a massive, highly detailed financial corporate directory fully illuminated the dark apartment room. Jamal quickly, eagerly opened the master hidden folders, his extremely sharp eyes rapidly scanning the highly complex spreadsheets, corporate lease agreements, and deeply hidden massive financial covenants. The more he quickly read, the significantly wider his highly confident smile grew. He let out a low, incredibly satisfied, deep chuckle that echoed loudly through the small apartment. Nia walked slowly over, looking highly confused by our sudden, extremely good mood. "What is so incredibly funny?" Nia asked, tightly crossing her arms. "We literally just tragically lost absolutely everything today." Jamal leaned comfortably back in his creaky wooden chair and shook his smart head in pure, total amazement. "Oh, Nia. Jamal smirked happily, pointing proudly at the glowing computer screen. Desmond was an absolute, completely undisputed financial genius. He did not just casually leave Maya a worthless, incredibly dusty shell company. He purposefully left her the absolute detonator. I looked carefully at the highly complicated financial documents beautifully displayed on the bright, glowing screen, feeling a truly powerful, massive surge of deep adrenaline intensely rush completely through my veins. The secret files clearly fully outlined the true, completely undeniable corporate nature of Apex Ventures. It was certainly not a garbage holding company primarily used for cheap corporate tax write-offs. It was actually the hidden, completely foundational master cornerstone of the entire massive legacy holdings corporate empire. Tavin and Kiara foolishly thought they had brilliantly, totally outsmarted me. They incorrectly thought they had ruthlessly, forcefully stolen the incredibly wealthy kingdom while purposely leaving me with absolutely nothing. They were currently happily celebrating their massive fake victory, popping incredibly expensive champagne back in my former luxurious living room, completely, totally unaware of the devastating massive financial avalanche currently heading straight toward them. They had greedily, happily swallowed the shiny bait without ever carefully checking to properly see if there was a deadly sharp hook hidden deep inside. I smiled broadly, feeling my earlier sorrow completely evaporate, entirely replaced by a very cold, highly calculating, fierce determination. The brutal war was not officially over. It was actually just beautifully getting started. And I perfectly held the only dangerous weapon that truly mattered. While we spent the next few weeks quietly plotting in our apartment, Tavon and Kiara wasted absolutely no time, completely destroying their father's hard-earned corporate legacy. They immediately began liquidating corporate assets just to fund a shockingly lavish, irresponsible lifestyle. The very first thing Tavon did was sell off 3 highly profitable commercial warehouses located in the West End neighborhood. He did this just to quickly buy matching customized imported sports cars for him and his arrogant sister. A week later, Kiara carelessly threw a ridiculously flashy yacht party on Lake Lanier that purposely cost the struggling company well over $100,000. She constantly posted dozens of obnoxious videos dancing wildly with her privileged friends, holding incredibly expensive champagne, and publicly bragging loudly about supposedly being the youngest, most successful female commercial real estate mogul in the entire city of Atlanta. But their highly reckless financial spending was definitely not the worst part of their massive betrayal. The true ultimate disrespect came when Tavon marched proudly into the Legacy Holdings corporate headquarters and systematically fired the loyal, older African-American contractors and dedicated senior staff. These were the exact same hardworking, brilliant men and women who had faithfully stood by Desmond for 20 long years. They had laid the actual heavy bricks and poured the real solid concrete to successfully build that massive company from the dusty ground up. Tavon coldly handed them cheap severance packages and immediately replaced them with his completely unqualified, highly privileged country club friends. He foolishly put young, inexperienced frat brothers in direct charge of highly complex, multi-million-dollar urban development portfolios. It was a massive, heartbreaking cultural betrayal, tearing down a powerful pillar of black excellence just to impress people who did not even respect him. I absolutely refused to sit around doing nothing, while those 2 spoiled children actively ran Desmond's great empire directly into the ground. I firmly decided to quickly get back on my own feet and focus heavily on my personal vision. I gathered the last remaining pieces of my personal savings and confidently reached out to some trusted local investors to successfully launch a new modest commercial community project in South Atlanta. It was a small but vital business incubator, beautifully designed specifically to help empower local minority entrepreneurs. I quickly secured a nice small plot of land and happily hired skilled independent contractors to begin the initial heavy foundation work. It felt incredibly good to finally build something positive and highly meaningful again. I thought I could peacefully fly under their radar, while Jamal meticulously continued analyzing the hidden corporate data. But my newfound peace definitely did not last very long. Kiara somehow maliciously found out about my brand new independent construction project. Her incredibly fragile, bloated ego simply could not handle the terrifying idea of me successfully rebuilding my life completely independent of their wealth. She viciously decided to use the massive corporate leverage of Legacy Holdings to actively threaten all of my local building suppliers. She aggressively told the major cement and heavy steel companies that if they dared to sell a single bag of materials to my community project, Legacy Holdings would permanently blacklist them from every major commercial development in the state of Georgia. The highly terrified suppliers immediately backed out to protect their own businesses. They abruptly canceled all my crucial material orders overnight, leaving my active construction site completely paralyzed and totally silent. I stood alone on the empty dirt lot, feeling a sharp, familiar sting of intense frustration bubbling up deeply inside my chest. The very next morning, my cell phone rang loudly. The caller identification clearly showed it was Kiara. I calmly answered the call, keeping my breathing perfectly steady and entirely controlled. I immediately heard her obnoxious, high-pitched laugh echoing sharply through the phone speaker. "Are you having some trouble getting your pathetic little charity project off the ground today?" Kiara gloated loudly, her arrogant voice dripping with pure toxic malice. "You really thought you could just start over and actually compete with us? Let me gladly give you a harsh reality check today. Legacy Holdings completely runs this city now. Nobody in Atlanta does business with a loser, Maya. You should take whatever miserable pennies you have left and immediately leave town before we crush you completely." I did not yell back. I did not angrily argue. I simply smiled coldly into the phone and silently ended the disrespectful call. Instead of crying over the paralyzed construction site, I walked straight into the tiny spare bedroom of our cheap rented apartment. We had completely transformed that extremely small space into a highly organized strategic war room. The thin, cheap walls were entirely covered in highly complex financial charts, printed property deeds, and deeply hidden corporate tax records. Jamal sat quietly at the center of the dark room, his sharp, analytical eyes intensely focused on his brightly glowing laptop screen. He had tirelessly spent the last 72 hours meticulously decoding absolutely every single encrypted file on the metal USB drive I had successfully smuggled out of Desmond's massive mahogany desk. Jamal looked incredibly focused, completely ignoring the outside world as he connected the invisible financial dots. Nia walked briskly into the war room carrying 3 hot cups of strong black coffee. She set them down firmly on the small desk. Nia carefully looked at the massive tangled web of corporate documents tightly taped to the apartment wall. "Please tell me we finally have enough solid ammunition to completely bury them," Nia said urgently, her strong voice tight with fierce protective anger. "They are out here recklessly firing good, hard-working people and maliciously sabotaging Maya's new community business. We desperately need to strike back incredibly hard before they destroy everything Desmond built." Jamal calmly grabbed his warm coffee mug and took a slow, deliberate sip. He did not look angry or highly stressed. He looked exactly like a brilliant master chess player who had just joyfully realized he had absolute checkmate in exactly 3 easy moves. "We do not just have simple ammunition today," Jamal said quietly, his dark eyes gleaming with intense, undeniable triumph. He slowly placed the coffee mug down on the wooden desk. "We have a massive nuclear bomb." Jamal quickly turned his sleek laptop screen around so Nia and I could clearly see the fully decoded financial records. He pointed directly to a heavily highlighted section of a highly confidential master real estate portfolio. "You see, Tavin and Kiara foolishly think they legally own absolutely everything," Jamal explained smoothly, his steady voice rising slightly with genuine excitement. "They incorrectly think Legacy Holdings is an entirely untouchable massive corporate fortress. But Desmond was easily 10 brilliant steps ahead of their greedy little minds." Jamal tapped the glowing computer screen very firmly with his index finger. "Legacy Holdings does not actually own the physical dirt under its top 5 most profitable commercial skyscrapers in downtown Atlanta." My eyes widened dramatically as I carefully read the official corporate deeds clearly displayed on the bright screen. The massive towering glass buildings definitely belonged to Legacy Holdings, but the highly valuable ground underneath was extremely different. The intensely valuable commercial ground underneath every single one of those massive skyscrapers was entirely officially owned by Apex Ventures. It was the exact same dusty, supposedly completely worthless shell company they had maliciously thrown at me during the terrible will reading. They had aggressively forced me to keep Apex Ventures specifically to highly humiliate me. They thought it was a useless empty box. But that is not even the best incredible part, Jamal continued excitedly, quickly pulling up a deeply hidden, highly classified corporate loan agreement. Exactly 5 years ago, when the main company was struggling terribly, Legacy Holdings secretly borrowed exactly $45 million in critical mezzanine debt just to stay financially afloat. They foolishly used the massive buildings themselves as direct financial collateral for the loan. I stared blankly at the computer screen, my racing heart pounding violently against my ribs as the complete brilliant truth emerged clearly. And who exactly is the primary creditor for that massive $45 million corporate loan? I asked quietly, though my highly analytical mind already knew the shocking, unbelievable answer. Jamal smiled a brilliant, dangerous smile that lit up his face. Apex Ventures is the sole absolute creditor, Jamal confirmed proudly, tapping the final financial document on the screen. Legacy Holdings owes the massive crushing debt directly to your shell company. Furthermore, Jamal added, adjusting his glasses, there is a strict covenant default clause buried deep inside this loan agreement. If Legacy Holdings ever faces a hostile change in executive management, or if the new owners fail to maintain proper operational liquidity, the entire $45 million debt immediately heavily accelerates. It becomes fully payable in cash within a short 48-hour window. The massive ultimate trap was finally completely revealed perfectly to us all. While we spent the next few weeks quietly plotting in our apartment, Tavon and Kiara wasted absolutely no time, completely destroying their father's hard-earned corporate legacy. They immediately began liquidating corporate assets just to fund a shockingly lavish, irresponsible lifestyle. The very first thing Tavon did was sell off 3 highly profitable commercial warehouses located in the West End neighborhood. He did this just to quickly buy matching customized imported sports cars for him and his arrogant sister. A week later, Kiara carelessly threw a ridiculously flashy yacht party on Lake Lanier that purposely cost the struggling company well over $100,000. She constantly posted dozens of obnoxious videos dancing wildly with her privileged friends, holding incredibly expensive champagne, and publicly bragging loudly about supposedly being the youngest, most successful female commercial real estate mogul in the entire city of Atlanta. But their highly reckless financial spending was definitely not the worst part of their massive betrayal. The true ultimate disrespect came when Tavon marched proudly into the Legacy Holdings corporate headquarters and systematically fired the loyal older African-American contractors and dedicated senior staff. These were the exact same hardworking, brilliant men and women who had faithfully stood by Desmond for 20 long years. They had laid the actual heavy bricks and poured the real solid concrete to successfully build that massive company from the dusty ground up. Tavon coldly handed them cheap severance packages and immediately replaced them with his completely unqualified, highly privileged country club friends. He foolishly put young, inexperienced frat brothers in direct charge of highly complex multi-million-dollar urban development portfolios. It was a massive, heartbreaking cultural betrayal, tearing down a powerful pillar of Black excellence just to impress people who did not even respect him. I absolutely refused to sit around doing nothing, while those 2 spoiled children actively ran Desmond's great empire directly into the ground. I firmly decided to quickly get back on my own feet and focus heavily on my personal vision. I gathered the last remaining pieces of my personal savings and confidently reached out to some trusted local investors to successfully launch a new modest commercial community project in South Atlanta. It was a small but a vital business incubator, beautifully designed specifically to help empower local minority entrepreneurs. I quickly secured a nice small plot of land and happily hired skilled independent contractors to begin the initial heavy foundation work. It felt incredibly good to finally build something positive and highly meaningful again. I thought I could peacefully fly under their radar, while Jamal meticulously continued analyzing the hidden corporate data. But my newfound peace definitely did not last very long. Kiara somehow maliciously found out about my brand new independent construction project. Her incredibly fragile, bloated ego simply could not handle the terrifying idea of me successfully rebuilding my life, completely independent of their wealth. She viciously decided to use the massive corporate leverage of Legacy Holdings to actively threaten all of my local building suppliers. She aggressively told the major cement and heavy steel companies that if they dared to sell a single bag of materials to my community project, Legacy Holdings would permanently blacklist them from every major commercial development in the state of Georgia. The highly terrified suppliers immediately backed out to protect their own businesses. They abruptly canceled all my crucial material orders overnight, leaving my active construction site completely paralyzed and totally silent. I stood alone on the empty dirt lot, feeling a sharp, familiar sting of intense frustration bubbling up deeply inside my chest. The very next morning, my cell phone rang loudly. The caller identification clearly showed it was Kiara. I calmly answered the call, keeping my breathing perfectly steady and entirely controlled. I immediately heard her obnoxious, high-pitched laugh echoing sharply through the phone speaker. "Are you having some trouble getting your pathetic little charity project off the ground today?" Kiara gloated loudly, her arrogant voice dripping with pure toxic malice. "You really thought you could just start over and actually compete with us? Let me gladly give you a harsh reality check today. Legacy Holdings completely runs this city now. Nobody in Atlanta does business with a loser, Maya. You should take whatever miserable pennies you have left and immediately leave town before we crush you completely." I did not yell back. I did not angrily argue. I simply smiled coldly into the phone and silently ended the disrespectful call. Instead of crying over the paralyzed construction site, I walked straight into the tiny spare bedroom of our cheap rented apartment. We had completely transformed that extremely small space into a highly organized strategic war room. The thin, cheap walls were entirely covered in highly complex financial charts, printed property deeds, and deeply hidden corporate tax records. Jamal sat quietly at the center of the dark room, his sharp, analytical eyes intensely focused on his brightly glowing laptop screen. He had tirelessly spent the last 72 hours meticulously decoding absolutely every single encrypted file on the metal USB drive I had successfully smuggled out of Desmond's massive mahogany desk. Jamal looked incredibly focused, completely ignoring the outside world as he connected the invisible financial dots. Nia walked briskly into the war room carrying 3 hot cups of strong black coffee. She set them down firmly on the small desk. Nia carefully looked at the massive, tangled web of corporate documents tightly taped to the apartment wall. "Please tell me we finally have enough solid ammunition to completely bury them," Nia said urgently, her strong voice tight with fierce protective anger. "They are out here recklessly firing good, hard-working people and maliciously sabotaging Maya's new community business. We desperately need to strike back incredibly hard before they destroy everything Desmond built." Jamal calmly grabbed his warm coffee mug and took a slow, deliberate sip. He did not look angry or highly stressed. He looked exactly like a brilliant master chess player who had just joyfully realized he had absolute checkmate in exactly 3 easy moves. "We do not just have simple ammunition today," Jamal said quietly, his dark eyes gleaming with intense, undeniable triumph. He slowly placed the coffee mug down on the wooden desk. "We have a massive nuclear bomb." Jamal leaned forward, his eyes locked onto the glowing spreadsheets. He began to meticulously break down the sheer brilliance of Desmond's ultimate financial fail-safe. Years ago, when Legacy Holdings was completely drowning in toxic debt and facing imminent bankruptcy, the major commercial banks stubbornly refused to extend another single dime of corporate credit. That was the exact pivotal moment when I had quietly stepped in to save the sinking ship. I had taken every single dollar I had aggressively earned from my own independent commercial developments and secretly formed Apex Ventures. Operating entirely in the corporate shadows, I used Apex to legally purchase the actual physical land right out from under Legacy Holdings. I bought the highly valuable commercial dirt beneath their most profitable towering skyscrapers. Then I seamlessly leased that exact same land directly back to Desmond's company at a highly favorable operational rate. It was a brilliant, highly unorthodox real estate maneuver that instantly injected enough pure liquid cash into Legacy Holdings to keep the massive empire entirely afloat. But Desmond and I did not just stop at a simple land lease. We strategically structured a massive $45 million rescue loan with an incredibly strict covenant default clause. Jamal proudly pointed to a heavily bolded paragraph buried deep within the complex corporate filing. If Legacy Holdings ever breached its required operational liquidity ratios, or if they foolishly missed a single scheduled lease payment to the primary landholder, the entire $45 million loan would instantly aggressively accelerate. It would immediately become fully due and payable in cash within a brutal 48-hour window. Furthermore, Desmond had legally tied the heavy corporate debt directly to the physical buildings themselves. If the company defaulted, Apex Ventures had the absolute unchallengeable legal right to forcefully seize the massive skyscrapers, effectively wiping out the entire Legacy Holdings portfolio overnight. We sat in the cramped apartment war room, fully realizing the sheer magnitude of the weapon we currently held. I owned the very ground they proudly walked on. While we patiently reviewed our flawless legal strategy, Taven was busily unknowingly triggering every single trapwire we had meticulously laid. His incredibly reckless spending spree had officially breached the strict liquidity covenants of the master loan agreement. Legacy Holdings was officially actively bleeding massive amounts of cash. Taven had absolutely no fundamental understanding of commercial real estate finance. He treated the massive corporate operational accounts exactly like a limitless personal checking account. He carelessly wired millions of dollars to offshore accounts to purchase luxury yachts, matching customized sports cars, and heavily overpriced designer jewelry for Kiara. He completely ignored the basic foundational principles of corporate capital reserves. Without the highly experienced older African American staff there to tightly manage the daily operational budgets, the entire corporate financial structure began to rapidly, violently collapse. The arrogant, inexperienced country club friends Taven had foolishly hired were far too busy planning lavish corporate retreats to actually review the mandatory monthly expenditure reports. The inevitable massive panic finally struck the pristine Legacy Holdings headquarters early on a Tuesday morning. The sprawling, luxurious executive penthouse suddenly felt incredibly small. Tavon's newly appointed head accountant, a deeply terrified young man who had only been on the job for exactly 3 weeks, burst frantically into the grand executive office. He was profusely sweating through his expensive tailored suit, clutching a thick stack of red-flagged financial documents. Taven was casually practicing his golf putt on the expensive imported carpet, while Kiara lounged on a white leather sofa, actively curating her social media feed. The accountant rushed forward, his voice trembling with sheer unadulterated panic. "Sir, the primary operational accounts are completely overdrawn." The accountant stammered loudly, waving the documents in the air. "We are currently facing a catastrophic financial emergency." Taven slowly lowered his golf putter, deeply annoyed by the sudden loud interruption. "What exactly are you babbling about?" Taven demanded harshly, walking over to the massive mahogany desk. "We literally just inherited a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Fix the minor accounting glitch and get out of my office." The accountant shook his head violently, his eyes wide with genuine terror. "It is definitely not a minor glitch, sir. We have a massive $45 million balloon payment rapidly approaching. The corporate liquidity ratios have completely violently crashed because of the recent heavy asset liquidations and massive personal withdrawals." Taven slammed the golf club down, his arrogant demeanor finally cracking slightly. $45 million, Taven shouted angrily. "We do not owe any bank $45 million. My father owned everything completely outright." The accountant wiped sweat from his pale forehead, stepping nervously back from the angry air. "That is the worst part, sir. The accountant explained, his voice cracking under the intense pressure. The debt is not held by a traditional commercial bank. It is a highly specialized mezzanine debt facility tied directly to the ground leases of our top 5 skyscrapers. And because you aggressively fired the entire senior accounting staff last month, the new, inexperienced finance team completely missed the critical monthly lease payments to the primary landholder. Kiara suddenly stopped scrolling on her expensive phone and sat up straight, sensing the rapidly escalating danger. "What exactly does missing a simple lease payment mean?" Kiara asked sharply, her voice tight with sudden anxiety. The accountant swallowed hard, looking absolutely miserable. "It means we have officially triggered a severe covenant default," the accountant explained grimly. "The entire $45 million loan has instantly accelerated. The landholder has the absolute legal right to demand full immediate payment. If we do not successfully wire the cash, they can legally foreclose on the buildings and seize the entire primary corporate portfolio." Taven grabbed the heavy stack of financial documents and began frantically flipping through the dense legal pages. His eyes darted wildly across the complex spreadsheets, unable to fully comprehend the massive financial disaster unfolding right in front of him. He violently threw the papers back onto the desk. "This is completely impossible!" Taven roared furiously, pacing the large executive office. "My father built a totally untouchable empire. Who the hell is this mysterious landholder? Call Attorney Sterling right now and get him up here immediately. We will sue whoever this is into absolute oblivion." Attorney. Sterling rushed into the penthouse office less than 10 minutes later, looking highly flustered and completely unprepared for the sudden crisis. Taven aggressively shoved the default notices directly into the lawyer's chest, demanding immediate aggressive legal action. "Find out exactly who owns the dirt under my buildings," Sterling Taven commanded viciously. "I want their company completely dismantled by tomorrow morning. I want to crush them so entirely they never dare threaten my family legacy again." Sterling quickly adjusted his designer glasses and nervously opened his sleek leather briefcase. He pulled out the master corporate registry files and began rapidly scanning the highly confidential property deeds. The wealthy lawyer had always prided himself on knowing every single intimate detail of Desmond's business, but he had clearly completely overlooked this specific, deeply hidden subsidiary. Sterling flipped to the final page of the master registry, his eyes locking firmly onto the official ownership title. The color instantly aggressively drained from the lawyer's face. His hands began to shake slightly, causing the thick legal papers to rattle softly in the quiet office. "Well," Taven demanded impatiently, slamming his hand on the desk, "who is it, Sterling? Who boldly thinks they can forcefully take my buildings away from me?" Sterling slowly looked up, his face an absolute mask of pure, unadulterated shock. His voice barely rose above a terrified whisper. "It is Apex Ventures." Sterling stammered heavily, his eyes wide with dawning horror. "The sole legal landholder and primary creditor is Apex Ventures." The room instantly fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. Kiara dropped her expensive phone onto the white leather sofa, her mouth falling open in complete disbelief. Taven stared blankly at the highly anxious lawyer, trying desperately to process the shocking, undeniable reality. Apex Ventures. Taven repeated slowly, the name tasting incredibly sour in his mouth. "You mean the dusty garbage shell company we forced Maya to take during the will reading? You are telling me my father's cheap little tax write-off actually owns the highly valuable ground under our skyscrapers?" Sterling nodded grimly, swallowing hard. "Yes, sir," Sterling confirmed quietly. "And because Maya is the sole legal owner of Apex Ventures, she is technically your sole creditor. She holds the absolute key to the massive $45 million debt." Taven paced the room furiously, his mind racing as he frantically tried to calculate a way out of the massive, fatal trap. He realized with absolute horrifying clarity that they desperately needed Apex Ventures to officially restructure the massive, crushing debt. If they did not quickly secure a favorable restructuring agreement, they would completely, violently lose absolutely everything Desmond had built. The luxury cars, the massive mansions, the country club memberships, it would all be forcefully seized and instantly liquidated. But then a slow, deeply sinister smile crept onto Tavon's arrogant face. His enormous bloated ego simply refused to accept that he had been brilliantly outsmarted. He looked over at Kiara, his confidence suddenly returning in full arrogant force. "Do not panic," Kiara Taven said smoothly, adjusting his expensive silk tie. "Think about it logically. Maya has absolutely no background in high-level corporate finance. She is just a simple project manager who got lucky marrying our wealthy father. There is absolutely no way she actually comprehends the true massive value of Apex Ventures." Kiara slowly smiled, her eyes glittering with renewed malicious intent. "You are absolutely right, Tavon," Kiara agreed eagerly, standing up and smoothing her designer dress. She is currently sitting in some cheap, tiny apartment crying over her lost lifestyle. She probably thinks Apex is just a bunch of useless old paperwork. Tavon confidently leaned against the mahogany desk, his arrogance completely blinding him to the incredibly dangerous reality. Tavon sneered viciously, pouring himself a fresh glass of expensive bourbon. "She is completely broke and desperately desperate. She would probably do absolutely anything just to get a tiny handful of quick cash. We do not need to fight her in a messy public court. Let us just drive down to whatever pathetic ghetto neighborhood she is hiding in right now. Let us go happily buy her little garbage company for absolute pennies." They truly believed they were about to execute the ultimate corporate steal. They thought they could simply wave a small, meaningless check in my face, and I would eagerly hand over the exact weapon that was actively destroying them. Tavon raised his crystal glass in a mocking toast to his sister, fully convinced of his own unmatched brilliance. They were excitedly preparing to walk directly into the incredibly lethal trap I had patiently set for them. They had absolutely no idea that the woman they were planning to cheaply buy off was currently carefully watching their entire empire crumble from a heavily fortified war room. The final stage of the ultimate absolute takeover was perfectly primed and heavily loaded. Early the very next morning, the loud, obnoxious roar of a highly modified luxury engine violently shattered the quiet peace of our modest working-class neighborhood. Jamal, Nia, and I were already awake, sitting around the small kitchen table finalizing our massive counterattack when the aggressive engine noise abruptly stopped right outside our thin front door. I slowly walked over to the narrow window and carefully pulled back the cheap plastic blinds just enough to see the narrow street below. A gleaming, customized white Bentley was illegally parked directly across two handicap spaces. It looked entirely completely absurd sitting there surrounded by beat-up older sedans and worn-out minivans. Tavon stepped out of the driver's side wearing an incredibly flashy designer suit that likely cost more than our entire annual apartment lease. He looked around the modest neighborhood with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust, physically wrinkling his nose at the simple surroundings. Kiara emerged from this passenger side, awkwardly attempting to balance on highly impractical stiletto heels while holding a cheap discounted bottle of wine from a local grocery store. They were clearly putting on a pathetic, highly calculated performance. They purposefully wore their most expensive, flashy clothing to heavily intimidate me, while simultaneously bringing the cheapest possible gift to subtly disrespect my current financial status. They genuinely thought they were walking into a depressing environment filled with absolute misery and total defeat. They had absolutely no idea they were casually strolling directly into a heavily fortified strategic war room. I quickly turned back to Nia and Jamal, silently signaling that our highly anticipated guests had finally arrived. Nia immediately smiled a brilliant, dangerous smile and smoothly walked over to the refrigerator. She calmly pulled out a massive, heavy glass pitcher filled to the absolute brim with freshly brewed ice-cold sweet tea. Jamal quickly closed his sleek laptop, pushing the highly confidential financial documents safely out of sight. A few moments later, a series of loud, aggressive knocks echoed sharply against our cheap wooden front door. They did not knock like polite guests gently asking for permission to enter. They knocked exactly like arrogant landlords demanding immediate entry into a property they completely owned. I stood perfectly still in the center of the small living room, allowing Nia to handle the initial fierce greeting. Nia yanked the front door open with sudden intense force, catching Tavon completely off guard. He had already plastered a sickeningly sweet, highly fake smile across his arrogant face, but it instantly vanished the moment he saw my fiercely protective sister standing there instead of me. Kiara tried to quickly step forward, holding up the cheap bottle of wine like a pathetic peace offering. "We came to see Maya," Kiara announced, her high-pitched voice dripping with heavy artificial sweetness. "We just want to have a nice, peaceful family chat." Nia did not say a single word. She just stared at them with cold, intense, absolute disdain. Without breaking eye contact for even a fraction of a second, Nia smoothly tilted the massive glass pitcher forward. A huge, freezing cascade of dark, sticky sweet tea poured directly down onto Tavin's incredibly expensive $3,000 imported suede loafers. Tavin shrieked loudly, jumping backward and frantically shaking his ruined designer shoes. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Tavan yelled furiously, his carefully constructed fake-friendly facade completely shattering in less than 10 seconds. "You just ruined my custom shoes, you crazy ghetto woman." Nia smiled sweetly, innocently, tilting her head to the side. "Oops," Nia said, her strong voice completely devoid of any actual apology. "It was just a simple slip of the hand. My fingers get terribly clumsy whenever I am suddenly forced to look at backstabbing, greedy little thieves. We do not want your cheap wine or your highly fake apologies in this house." I finally stepped forward, gently moving Nia aside so I could stand directly in the narrow doorway. I kept my face totally neutral, perfectly hiding the intense, calculating energy rushing through my veins. "What exactly do you want, Haven't?" I asked tiredly, making sure my voice sounded suitably exhausted and completely defeated. Tavin took a deep, angry breath, desperately trying to forcefully regain his previous arrogant composure. He aggressively wiped his sticky, ruined shoes on our cheap welcome mat and glared fiercely into the small apartment. "We have been thinking a lot recently." Maya Tavin started smoothing his designer tie with shaking hands. "Dad would absolutely hate seeing us fighting like this in public. It is terribly bad for the corporate image. We decided we want to formally buy out your 10% minority share and that little dusty Apex company you own. We just want to cleanly wrap up all the messy remaining paperwork so we can finally move on with our lives." Kiara nodded enthusiastically, stepping forward again. "We are actually doing you a massive favor," Maya, Kiara lied smoothly, her eyes darting judgmentally around our cramped living space. "You obviously desperately need the money right now. Just sign the holding company over to us, and you can finally afford to move out of this depressing, horrible little dump." I stared at them, completely amazed by their sheer, unadulterated audacity. They were literally standing on the absolute brink of total financial annihilation, desperately needing my signature to save their entire stolen empire, and they still had the incredible nerve to act like they were doing me a charitable favor. "How much exactly are you offering for my remaining shares in Apex Ventures?" I asked, keeping my tone incredibly flat and perfectly hesitant. Tavin puffed out his chest, looking immensely proud of himself. $1 million in cold hard cash, Taven announced loudly, acting as if he was offering me the entire world. $1 million, Maya. Plus, we will generously agree to a full, complete transfer of all corporate liability. You sign the papers and you walk away completely clean with $1 million in your bank account today. You will never have to worry about a single corporate debt or legal obligation ever again. I slowly looked down at the floor, acting as if I was deeply, heavily torn by the massive decision. I knew exactly what they were trying to do. By legally transferring all corporate liability, they incorrectly thought they were cleanly acquiring the highly valuable land beneath their skyscrapers, while simultaneously legally protecting themselves from any future lawsuits regarding the forged will. They were trying to brilliantly lock me out forever. Just as Taven finished presenting his insultingly low offer, my cell phone began ringing loudly from the kitchen counter. I slowly walked over and answered the call, putting it directly on speakerphone for everyone in the room to clearly hear. It was Harrison, my highly anxious, fiercely loyal corporate attorney. "Maya, please tell me you did not let those two greedy vultures inside your apartment." Harrison shouted, his loud, frantic voice echoing sharply off the thin walls. "Jamal just sent me the deeply disturbing details of the legal contract they drafted yesterday. Do not sign a single page of that completely ridiculous document. It is a massive, dangerous trick. Tavon and Kiara instantly froze, their arrogant faces draining of color. They stared at the phone with wide, terrified eyes, genuinely panicking that my smart lawyer was about to completely ruin their desperate, secretive plan. They aggressively motioned for me to hang up the call immediately. Maya listened to me very carefully. Harrison continued, his voice rising in absolute pure panic. They are trying to legally rob you completely blind. You are handing them a multi-million-dollar real estate portfolio for a tiny microscopic fraction of its actual true worth. Do not let them aggressively bully you into signing away your incredibly valuable leverage. If you sign that specific liability transfer, you are giving them the exact legal key they desperately need to unlock everything. I looked slowly up from the phone and stared directly into Tavon's highly anxious, sweating face. I could clearly see the sheer, unadulterated desperation radiating from his trembling hands. I could see the absolute deep terror hiding behind Kiara's heavily manicured false exterior. They needed this signature to survive. I reached forward and firmly pressed the glowing red button on the screen, abruptly cutting off Harrison's frantic, loud warnings mid-sentence. The small apartment fell into a heavy, completely suffocating silence. Nia and Jamal watched me intently, waiting for the flawless performance to reach its ultimate peak. I let out a long, perfectly simulated sigh of total, overwhelming exhaustion. I allowed my shoulders to slump heavily forward, making myself look entirely broken by the relentless, stressful corporate warfare. I looked back at Tavon, my eyes completely dead and empty. I do not have the energy to fight you or your expensive lawyers anymore. Tavon, I whispered softly, my voice cracking. Draft the transfer papers how you want them. I will sign them. I want out. I stared blankly at Harrison through the glowing screen of my cell phone, my mind rapidly racing as I meticulously processed the immense magnitude of the crucial situation. The small, cheap apartment was completely perfectly silent except for the incredibly loud, frantic breathing coming directly through the tiny phone speaker. Maya, please. Harrison pleaded loudly, his usually very calm professional voice cracking heavily with pure, unadulterated fear. You absolutely cannot legally sign that incredibly dangerous contract. It is a massive, fatal financial trap designed specifically to permanently destroy you. You are literally handing them a multi-million-dollar, highly valuable land portfolio for a tiny, microscopic fraction of its true actual worth. I kept my face entirely, completely expressionless, totally refusing to show even the slightest hint of emotion. Across the cramped living room, Tavon and Kiara watched me with wide, terrified eyes, genuinely panicking that my smart lawyer was actively ruining their desperate, brilliant plan. They aggressively motioned for me to hang up the phone immediately, their expensive designer clothes rustling loudly in the tense, quiet room. I let out a long, perfectly simulated dramatic sigh of total, overwhelming emotional exhaustion. I purposefully allowed my stiff shoulders to slump heavily forward, making myself look entirely deeply broken by the relentless, exhausting corporate warfare. I looked back at Tavon, my dark eyes purposefully dead and entirely incredibly empty. I do not have the energy to fiercely fight you or your expensive, aggressive lawyers anymore. Tavon. I whispered softly, my voice cracking perfectly on cue. I slowly, firmly pressed the glowing red button on the bright screen, abruptly cutting off Harrison's frantic, loud warnings mid-sentence. The sudden, sharp silence in the room was completely, utterly deafening. Tavon stared at me in pure, absolute shock for a brief second, before a massive, victorious, arrogant smile quickly spread completely across his sweating face. He actually genuinely believed he had finally successfully broken my strong spirit. Draft the transfer papers exactly how you want them, I said, my voice barely above a soft, defeated whisper. I will sign them today. I want out. Tavon and Kiara practically sprinted out of the small apartment, their expensive designer shoes loudly clattering down the cheap concrete stairs. They could not possibly leave fast enough, desperate to quickly get the legal paperwork finalized before I supposedly changed my tired mind. The heavy wooden front door slammed loudly shut behind them. The instant the loud lock clicked securely into place, my defeated, slumped posture completely entirely vanished. I stood up perfectly straight, a slow, incredibly cold, calculating smile spreading smoothly across my face. Nia stared at me like I had completely, absolutely lost my entire mind. Maya, what the hell did you just do? Nia shouted furiously, throwing her hands up in the air. Did you actually just give those two greedy little monsters everything Desmond built for a measly $1 million? Harrison is right, you are completely insane. Jamal quietly chuckled from his dark corner, comfortably sipping his cold coffee. He did not look worried or angry at all. He looked exactly like a brilliant master chess player who had just successfully lured his incredibly arrogant opponent into a deadly, inescapable trap. Calm down, Nia Jamal said smoothly, his deep voice filled with intense, undeniable satisfaction. Maya did not just randomly lose her mind. She just successfully executed the most brilliant, aggressive corporate trap I have ever witnessed. Nia frowned deeply, tightly crossing her arms. Trap? What trap? She just literally verbally agreed to hand over the entire incredibly valuable land portfolio. Jamal stood up and walked slowly over to his glowing laptop, proudly tapping the complex financial screen. She is definitely not just handing over the highly valuable land, Nia Jamal explained, his eyes gleaming brightly. By willingly signing the highly specific corporate contract Tavon is currently frantically drafting, they are not just aggressively taking the valuable physical assets. They are legally, forcefully assuming 100% of the heavy corporate liabilities directly into their own personal names. Nia still looked highly confused. I carefully stepped forward to properly clarify the incredibly complex legal trap. Jamal is absolutely right, Nia, I said, my voice vibrating with intense, fierce energy. Do you remember the massive $45 million secret corporate loan we quietly discovered yesterday? Nia nodded slowly. Yes, the massive loan that Apex Ventures legally holds over Legacy Holdings. Exactly, Jamal said proudly. Tavin and Kiara are currently desperately trying to forcefully merge Apex Ventures entirely back into Legacy Holdings to neatly clean up the messy corporate paperwork and fully legally eliminate the massive crushing debt. They foolishly think that by buying my small shell company, they will simply peacefully erase the $45 million they currently heavily owe. But they do not truly fundamentally understand high-level complex corporate finance. They completely miss the hidden deadly poison pill provision deeply buried inside the original master loan agreement. I smiled coldly, remembering Desmond's brilliant, flawless legal foresight. The poison pill provision states that any hostile aggressive takeover or any forced structural transfer of Apex Ventures, corporate management immediately violently triggers an absolute acceleration clause on the massive $45 million debt, I explained smoothly. By aggressively trying to forcefully steal my company through a hostile buyout, they are actively intentionally detonating the massive bomb themselves. If they legally sign that specific transfer contract, the entire massive $45 million becomes immediately fully payable in cash within exactly 48 brutal hours. Naya gasped loudly, her dark eyes widening dramatically as the sheer brilliant magnitude of the lethal trap finally completely clicked in her smart head. And because they are eagerly drafting the legal contract to heavily explicitly include a full complete transfer of all corporate liability into their own personal names, they are violently bypassing all their safe trust fund protections. Nia realized, her strong voice filled with pure absolute awe. They are purposely legally tying their own personal bank accounts, mansions, and expensive cars directly to the massive crushing corporate debt. Jamal nodded enthusiastically, clapping his hands together. Exactly, Jamal cheered loudly. They are literally begging to personally guarantee a $45 million debt that they definitely, absolutely cannot ever possibly pay. Tavon and Kia are so incredibly blinded by their own massive greedy arrogance that they are happily rapidly building their own absolute total financial execution chamber. They think they are brilliantly outsmarting Maya, but they are actually gleefully walking directly into a deadly lethal corporate slaughterhouse. The incredible brilliant perfection of the trap was completely absolutely breathtaking. We did not even have to actively aggressively fight them in a long, messy public court. We simply had to peacefully step back and quietly allow their own massive toxic greed to completely, absolutely destroy them. Later that same busy afternoon, Taven arrogantly called to officially aggressively confirm the final signing details. His loud voice was dripping with pure toxic triumphant malice. He clearly wanted to publicly brutally humiliate me one final time before completely forcefully kicking me out of their wealthy elite world forever. We are setting up the official final signing for tomorrow morning at the Legacy Holdings downtown executive penthouse. Tavon announced proudly, his arrogant voice booming obnoxiously through the speakerphone. I have proudly invited a select few highly influential guests from the Atlanta Black elite to properly formally witness the historic important transition. We want to show everyone that we have officially successfully cleansed our great father's massive empire of the temporary little gold digger. Dress nicely, Maya. We will certainly have professional news cameras there to properly permanently document your final pathetic exit. I kept my voice perfectly flat and completely wonderfully subservient. I will be there, I replied softly, perfectly, masking the intense, fierce, predatory joy burning deeply inside my chest. I silently hung up the phone and looked directly at Nia and Jamal. They want a massive public media spectacle, I smiled coldly. They want to beautifully invite all the highly important, powerful people in Atlanta to perfectly witness my total, absolute defeat. Nia smirked a dangerous, fierce, incredibly sharp smile. She slowly walked directly over to the small, cramped bedroom closet and forcefully yanked the cheap wooden door open. She carefully reached into the very back and proudly pulled out a stunning, immaculate, perfectly tailored crimson-red designer power suit. It was the exact same beautiful, fierce suit I had proudly worn the day Desmond and I had successfully closed our very first massive multi-million-dollar commercial real estate deal together. Nia gently, respectfully laid the incredibly striking red suit directly across the small bed, smoothing the beautiful, expensive fabric with her hands. She looked up at me, her dark eyes burning with fierce, absolute, total, undeniable triumph. "Oh, Maya." Nia smiled fiercely, her voice dropping to a low, incredibly dangerous whisper. "We are absolutely, definitely not just going to a simple, boring corporate meeting tomorrow morning. We are going to a highly publicized, incredibly massive, brutal financial funeral. And we are going to look absolutely stunning when we finally elegantly bury them." Jamal did not sleep a single second that entire night. He was now meticulously drafting a highly specific legal addendum to the master transfer contract. This was definitely not just a simple cut-and-paste legal document. It required profound legal maneuvering and incredibly sharp financial intellect to perfectly bury the lethal debt acceleration clause deep inside the dense fine print of the liability transfer. Jamal carefully structured the complex language so that the moment Tavon and Kiara signed their names to legally acquire Apex Ventures, they would be completely stripping away their own protective corporate veil. They would instantly assume the crushing $45 million debt as a direct personal financial obligation. Jamal typed aggressively, his fingers flying rapidly across the glowing keyboard as he wove the ultimate invisible corporate noose. He purposefully used the exact same arrogant legal jargon that Attorney Sterling always favored, knowing the arrogant lawyer would likely skim the dense text, assuming he had already completely won the battle. The sheer brilliance of the legal trap was entirely in its deceptive simplicity. The addendum explicitly stated that the new acquiring owners fully accepted all historical, current, and future operational liabilities of the subsidiary company. It initially looked like standard boilerplate legal protection for the seller, but tied directly to the heavily encrypted mezzanine debt covenant, that one single mundane sentence acted as a highly sensitive trigger wire. Jamal slowly reviewed the final draft exactly 12 times, checking every single tiny comma and every single legal definition to ensure there was absolutely zero room for any legal escape. When the bright morning sun finally began to rise over the Atlanta skyline, Jamal proudly printed the flawlessly executed addendum and carefully slipped it inside a sleek black leather portfolio. He looked completely exhausted, but his dark eyes burned with intense predatory satisfaction. We were now fully armed and entirely ready for an absolute total corporate war today. The morning of the highly anticipated signing felt incredibly electric. I stood silently in front of the cheap warped bedroom mirror, preparing myself with cold, calculating precision. I carefully slipped into the stunning tailored crimson power suit Nia had retrieved from the closet. The rich, heavy fabric fit me absolutely perfectly, instantly transforming my entire posture. I did not just look like a grieving widow or a defeated victim today. I looked exactly like a ruthless corporate conqueror. I deliberately chose to wear minimal makeup and pulled my dark hair back into a severe, tight bun. I wanted absolutely nothing to distract from the cold, hard intensity of my eyes. I clasped a simple, elegant gold watch around my wrist, checking the precise time. Every single second of this crucial morning had to be executed with absolute flawless perfection. I looked at Nia, who was dressed in a sharp black tailored pantsuit, looking like my fiercely loyal personal bodyguard. We exchanged a silent, firm nod of total mutual understanding. Across the wealthy city, inside the sprawling, luxurious Buckhead mansion, Kiara was experiencing a vastly different morning routine. She selfishly hired an entire professional glam squad to arrive at the estate by 6 in the morning. Two expensive makeup artists and a high-end celebrity hairstylist hovered anxiously around her, while she sat comfortably in a velvet chair, sipping expensive imported champagne. She loudly bragged to the highly paid stylists about her massive impending corporate victory. "I am finally taking the trash entirely out of our prestigious family business," Kiara boasted arrogantly, holding up her phone to record another obnoxious social media update. "My clueless stepmother actually thinks she is walking away with $1 million today, but she is really just giving us total, absolute control of the entire Atlanta commercial real estate market. Make my cheekbones look incredibly sharp today, ladies. I want to look absolutely flawless when I officially kick her pathetic broke self directly out of my magnificent high-rise penthouse." Tavin was equally consumed by his own massive, bloated ego. He spent the entire morning aggressively barking loud orders at his terrified new assistant over the phone, ensuring that every single major local news outlet would be perfectly positioned inside the executive boardroom. He carefully selected a highly expensive custom-tailored Italian silk suit specifically designed to make him look like the ultimate young billionaire mogul. He practiced his fake sympathetic smile in the mirror, preparing his passive-aggressive speech about graciously helping his poor, struggling stepmother transition out of the complex corporate world. He genuinely believed this highly publicized signing would permanently solidify his elite status among the incredibly wealthy Black business leaders of Atlanta. He had absolutely no idea that he was spending thousands of dollars to beautifully orchestrate his own spectacular public execution. The sheer magnitude of their combined hubris was truly staggering. We finally arrived at the towering glass and steel Legacy Holdings headquarters in busy downtown Atlanta, right at 9 o'clock. Jamal confidently parked his car, and we stepped out into the warm, humid morning air. Harrison, my highly anxious lawyer, was already anxiously pacing back and forth on the wide concrete sidewalk, tightly clutching his expensive leather briefcase. Harrison still looked incredibly worried, wiping nervous sweat from his pale forehead as we quickly approached the massive corporate building. "Maya, I am officially advising you one last time to walk away from this incredibly reckless deal," Harrison pleaded, his voice tight with genuine professional panic. I completely ignored his frantic warnings, entirely keeping my eyes locked firmly on the towering corporate structure Desmond had built. "Follow my exact lead today, Harrison," I commanded coldly. "Do not speak unless I specifically instruct you to speak. Just hand the documents to Sterling when the exact proper moment arrives." We confidently pushed through the heavy revolving glass doors and stepped into the expansive, luxurious marble lobby. The massive open space was immediately filled with the loud, busy hum of morning corporate activity, but the sudden noise noticeably dropped the exact moment we walked inside. Dozens of smartly dressed employees suddenly stopped their fast walking and stared directly at us in sheer surprise. Whispers quickly rippled through the large, crowded lobby as people recognized me. Despite Tavon's aggressive, ruthless layoffs, Several of the older veteran African American staff members who had managed to quietly survive the brutal corporate purge were still working at the front security desks and the main reception area. They remembered exactly how hard I had fought to protect their pensions and their vital healthcare benefits when Desmond first fell terribly ill. They knew the real authentic truth about my absolute dedication to this company. As we marched purposefully toward the private executive elevators, an older black security guard named Marcus, who had faithfully worked for Desmond for over 15 years, caught my eye. Marcus stood up perfectly straight behind his polished marble desk and gave me a very slow, deeply respectful nod. He did not say a single word, but his silent, powerful gesture spoke absolute volumes. Several other veteran employees subtly nodded in quiet, firm solidarity as I walked proudly past their busy workstations. They clearly thought I was marching bravely to my ultimate corporate defeat, but they still wanted to show their profound, unwavering respect for the woman who had genuinely cared about their families. I held my head incredibly high, drawing immense, powerful strength from their quiet, loyal support. I was not just fighting to brutally punish Taven and Kiara today. I was fighting to violently rip this stolen empire out of their toxic, greedy hands and rightfully return it to a place of true corporate honor. The smooth, high-speed elevator ride up to the top executive penthouse felt incredibly fast. The heavy metal doors quietly slid open, revealing the lavishly decorated top floor. Attorney Sterling was already standing there arrogantly waiting for us directly outside the massive mahogany boardroom doors. He wore a ridiculously expensive tailored suit and a fiercely smug, condescending smile that made my blood aggressively boil. Sterling immediately stepped forward, purposely attempting to physically block our path to establish his pathetic false dominance. He looked me up and down with intense, visible disdain before turning his full, arrogant attention directly to my anxious lawyer. "Tell your client to smile pretty for the bright news cameras today." Harrison Sterling sneered loudly, his voice dripping with pure toxic, triumphant malice. "It is officially over. Make sure she signs exactly where I placed the yellow sticky tabs, so we can quickly get her cheap, ungrateful self entirely out of our prestigious building." Maya brushed past Sterling, whispering, "I hope your malpractice insurance is up to date, Sterling." She pushed open the heavy mahogany doors to the boardroom. The heavy mahogany doors glided open under my hands, revealing a spectacle of pure manufactured triumph. The room was blindingly bright. Camera flashes erupted instantly. Tavon had pulled out all the stops for his grand coronation. He had invited top-tier journalists from Black Enterprise, leading anchors from local Atlanta news stations, and a carefully curated selection of high society influencers who thrived on wealth and drama. Waitstaff in crisp white uniforms circulated silently through the crowded space, carrying silver trays loaded with crystal flutes of expensive vintage champagne. The penthouse boardroom of Legacy Holdings offered a stunning panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline, but no one was looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows today. Every single eye in the room was locked directly on me as I stepped across the threshold with Nia, Jamal, and Harrison trailing closely behind. Tavon stood at the head of the massive custom-built glass conference table. He was wearing a ridiculously flashy tailored silk suit that screamed of new money and unearned confidence. Kiara sat to his right, posing perfectly for the cameras while adjusting a heavy diamond necklace that I knew for a fact was paid for by the company corporate account. They had arranged this entire media circus specifically to humiliate me. They wanted the entire city to witness my total absolute defeat. I kept my posture impeccably straight, my face, a mask of chillingly serene calm, as I walked toward the empty leather chair waiting for me at the opposite end of the long table. The rhythmic clicking of camera shutters sounded like a firing squad, but I did not blink. I sat down, smoothing the skirt of my crimson suit, and folded my hands neatly on the glass surface. Taven confidently tapped his crystal champagne flute with a silver spoon, commanding the immediate attention of the crowded room. The low hum of networking chatter quickly faded into absolute silence as the news cameras pivoted to focus entirely on him. "Thank you all for joining us on this truly historic morning," Taven began, his voice booming with artificial authority and practiced charm. Today marks a monumental turning point for Legacy Holdings and for our proud family. As many of you know, my late father Desmond was a visionary pioneer in Atlanta commercial real estate. He laid the foundational bricks of this great empire with his bare hands. He built a towering legacy of Black excellence that my sister Kiara and I are now incredibly honored to officially carry forward into the next generation. Taven paused, dramatically looking around the room to soak in the polite applause from the invited influencers. His eyes then slowly dragged down the length of the glass table to lock onto me. The charming smile on his face twisted into a highly condescending smirk. Of course, we must acknowledge the transition period, following my father's sudden passing. Tavon continued, his voice dripping with heavy, passive-aggressive malice. During times of unexpected grief, temporary measures are often necessary to keep the ship steady. Maya stepped in during that difficult temporary phase to offer her basic assistance. We are certainly appreciative of her brief presence during a dark time. But a true legacy requires the rightful heirs to finally take their absolute rightful place at the helm of the ship. We are gathered here today to officially formally thank Maya for serving as a temporary stepping stone. We are generously compensating her to peacefully step away so the true, authentic bloodline can reclaim total control of the family empire. The sheer, unadulterated disrespect in his carefully chosen words hung heavily in the tense air of the penthouse. I was publicly framing my 10 years of grueling 80-hour work weeks, my financial sacrifices, and my absolute dedication to saving his father's bankrupt company as nothing more than a minor temporary inconvenience. I could feel Nia shifting furiously in the chair beside me. Her hands were balled into tight, aggressive fists resting on her knees. I subtly tapped her foot with the toe of my heel, sending a silent, firm command to remain perfectly still. The trap was already set. I just needed them to step blindly onto the trigger. The reporters in the room eagerly scribbled in their notepads, completely eating up the false narrative of the triumphant prodigal son reclaiming his stolen throne from the opportunistic gold-digger stepmother. Kiara took that exact moment to make her highly calculated move. She stood up from her leather chair, ensuring the camera operators had a clear, unobstructed angle of her designer outfit and flawless makeup. She picked up a thick, heavy stack of legally binding transfer documents from the center of the table and slid them forcefully across the smooth glass surface directly toward me. The heavy paper stack hit my hands with a loud, definitive thud. "Sign right here," Maya Kiara commanded, her voice ringing with arrogant, supreme satisfaction. She looked down her nose at me, completely intoxicated by her own manufactured power. "Do not worry, we made sure you are being heavily compensated for your prompt exit today. Your $1 million buyout check is already cut and waiting in Attorney Sterling's briefcase. Just sign on the dotted lines, and you can finally go back to whatever quiet little life you had before you met our father." And Maya Kiara added, flashing a wicked, nasty smile for the flashing cameras. "Do not spend it all in one place." A few of Tavon's wealthy country club friends chuckled loudly in the back of the room, openly enjoying the brutal public humiliation. Harrison, my highly anxious lawyer, leaned in quickly from my left side, softly clearing his throat to maintain the required illusion of legal desperation. "Maya, you do not have to do this right now," Harrison whispered, his voice trembling with perfectly simulated professional panic. "We can take these documents back to my office and fight this in court." I slowly raised my hand, silencing him instantly. The room held its collective breath, waiting eagerly for me to break down, waiting for the tears, waiting for the explosive, angry outburst that would perfectly fit the narrative of a defeated, desperate woman losing her final grip on power. I gave them absolutely nothing. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice to defend my honor. I certainly did not cry a single tear. I simply maintained a chillingly serene, calm smile that unnerved several of the reporters standing closest to the table. I slowly, deliberately reached into the inside pocket of my crimson blazer and pulled out my heavy, custom-engraved gold Mont Blanc pen. It was the exact same pen Desmond had gifted me the day we closed the Apex Ventures deal to secretly save this very company from absolute financial ruin. The heavy gold metal felt incredibly cool and perfectly balanced in my steady hand. I clicked the pen open with a sharp, definitive snap that echoed loudly across the silent room. I opened the thick legal binder and turned directly to the first signature page. I did not rush. I took my absolute time ensuring every single letter of my signature was executed with bold, flawless perfection. The loud, rhythmic clicking of camera shutters intensified, capturing every single movement of my hand as I legally signed away my 10% minority share. I turned the page and signed the document, fully releasing my executive board voting rights. I turned another page and signed the absolute relinquishment of all my operational authority over the massive commercial real estate portfolios. I turned to the final, highly crucial section of the contract, the transfer of Apex Ventures. I signed my name, releasing 100% of the shell company directly into the personal possession of Tavon and Kiara. My hand never shook once. My serene smile never wavered. I was not signing away an empire today. I was signing their absolute total financial death warrant. The final stroke of ink settled permanently onto the thick legal paper. I calmly placed the gold cap back onto my Mont Blanc pen and smoothly slid the heavy document stack across the long glass table. Taven practically lunged forward to intercept it. He snatched the documents, triumphantly clutching them to his chest like a massive championship trophy. He turned directly to face the flashing news cameras, holding the signed legal transfer high in the air for everyone in the room to clearly witness. "It is done," Taven shouted, his voice echoing loudly with pure, unfiltered, arrogant euphoria. "The entire empire is officially 100% ours." He handed the thick stack to Sterling to verify. Sterling adjusted his glasses, flipping casually to the back pages. Suddenly, his arrogant eyes locked directly onto a highly specific, heavily formatted page he absolutely did not draft himself. Jamal had flawlessly buried the deadly addendum perfectly within the liability clauses. Sterling stopped breathing. He froze in absolute, unadulterated terror as the massive, lethal trap completely closed. Kiara abruptly stood up, knocking her heavy leather chair backward. Her flawless makeup could not hide the sheer panic rapidly spreading across her face. "Oh, who?" Kiara screamed hysterically, looking wildly around the crowded room. "We do not owe any bank $45 million. My father owned everything completely outright." I finally broke my chillingly serene silence. I slowly stood up from the leather chair, resting my hands flat on the cool glass table. My voice rang out clear and dangerously calm, silencing the entire panicked room. "You do not owe a commercial bank, Kiara," I stated firmly. "You owe Apex Ventures, which means you legally owe me now." The absolute shock that rippled through the room was incredibly palpable. The invited reporters instantly stopped whispering and started frantically recording every single word. I locked my eyes directly onto Taven's sweating, terrified face and delivered the ultimate crushing truth. 5 years ago, when your father was drowning in toxic debt and facing imminent bankruptcy, no bank in Atlanta would lend him a single red dime. I used my own independent real estate earnings to quietly form Apex Ventures. I bought the physical land directly out from under this very building and leased it back to him, saving his massive empire. The $45 million rescue loan had a strict covenant default clause. By aggressively forcing this hostile corporate takeover and legally signing those transfer documents today, you did not just steal my company. You legally bypassed all your completely protective trust fund shields and tied your own personal bank accounts directly to the massive, heavy corporate debt. You arrogant fools literally just signed a personal guarantee for a $45 million bomb. I continued, my voice rising with fierce, undeniable power. You wanted the entire empire absolutely free and clear. Well, you took the glorious crown, but you also happily swallowed the massive poisonous debt that came firmly attached to it. Because you missed the mandatory land lease payments last month, you triggered the aggressive acceleration clause. Every single penny is now entirely due. The devastating reality of his massive, monumental failure finally fully hit Tavon. His eyes bulged with pure toxic rage. The prestigious corporate empire he thought he had brilliantly stolen was actually a massive, deadly financial prison. "You set us up," Tavon roared furiously. "You set us up, you dirty gold digger." Tavin blindly lunged violently across the long glass table, his hands reaching aggressively toward my bare throat. He never even made it halfway. Jamal moved with blinding, terrifying speed. He smoothly intercepted the charging air, grabbing Tavon's extended arm and twisting it sharply behind his back. Jamal forcefully slammed Tavon face first down onto the hard glass conference table. The loud, aggressive crash echoed like a gunshot. "Watch your hands, little boy," Jamal growled fiercely, pressing his heavy forearm firmly against the back of Tavon's expensive silk suit. "You are playing in a league you definitely do not understand today." The entire penthouse boardroom instantly exploded into a massive, chaotic media frenzy. The elite invited reporters completely realized they were currently witnessing the absolute greatest corporate takedown in modern Atlanta history. Bright camera flashes erupted violently, illuminating Tavon's humiliated face pressed firmly against the cold glass. Kiara was hyperventilating loudly, clutching her diamond necklace and frantically screaming for corporate security. But the veteran older African-American security guards simply stood perfectly still by the heavy mahogany doors, actively choosing to do absolutely nothing. They quietly watched the arrogant boy, who had brutally fired their dedicated friends, get exactly what he truly deserved right now today. I slowly, confidently walked around the large conference table until I was standing directly over Tavon's pinned, struggling body. He glared up at me with tears of pure, helpless rage pooling in his panicked eyes. I looked down at him, feeling absolutely zero pity. "You wanted the Grand Empire, Tavon," I said coldly, my voice easily cutting clearly through the massive room chaos. "It is officially yours, along with the crushing toxic debt. If you do not successfully wire exactly $45 million directly into my personal holding account by 5 p.m. on Friday, I am fully foreclosing on this entire company. I will legally seize the Buckhead mansion, your customized sports cars, your expensive jewelry, and absolutely everything you proudly own right now today, little arrogant boy." I smoothly turned my back on his pathetic, struggling form and confidently faced the stunned, flashing cameras. I adjusted my tailored crimson suit jacket, perfectly maintaining my flawless, composed posture. Nia smiled a fierce, deeply satisfied smile, entirely loving every single second of their brutal public execution. "Let us go home," Nia said proudly, linking her arms strongly through mine. "We have a massive foreclosure auction to beautifully plan for Friday evening." I proudly marched directly out of the chaotic boardroom, leaving the shattered, greedy villains to desperately choke on their own toxic, arrogant poison. The walk to the private executive elevator felt incredibly magnificent. The heavy mahogany doors swung shut firmly behind us, completely sealing Tavon and Kiara inside their spectacular, newly acquired nightmare. Harrison wiped beads of nervous sweat from his pale forehead, loudly exhaling a massive breath he had been tightly holding. "Maya. That was absolutely the most terrifying, brilliant legal maneuver I have ever witnessed in my entire professional career." Harrison stammered, his briefcase trembling slightly in his grip. "I thought you were genuinely throwing everything away, but you basically handed them a ticking financial time bomb perfectly wrapped in a shiny red ribbon." Jamal chuckled deeply pressing the glowing elevator button with calm precision. They were entirely too blinded by their massive, bloated egos to ever read the fine print, Jamal stated proudly. They arrogantly assumed Maya was just a weak target they could easily bully. They completely forgot she spent the last 10 grueling years fiercely negotiating with the most ruthless commercial real estate sharks in the entire city of Atlanta today, right now, absolutely perfectly. Nia enthusiastically bumped her shoulder against mine, her dark eyes shining with immense protective pride. "You beautifully executed that flawless performance, sister," Nia cheered happily. "Did you see Kiara's terrified face when she finally realized she was personally on the hook for $45 million? She looked like she was going to aggressively faint right onto her ridiculous, overpriced designer shoes." I allowed myself a small, genuinely relaxed smile as the polished metal elevator doors smoothly slid open. We stepped confidently inside, watching the prestigious penthouse floor completely disappear from view. "I did not just defeat them today," I said quietly, my voice resonating with deep, powerful, absolute certainty. "I forced them to eagerly, happily destroy themselves." I gave them enough greedy rope to securely hang their own toxic legacy. Now we patiently wait for the brutal, inevitable collapse. The 48-hour countdown had officially aggressively begun today. The aggressive, relentless ticking of the 48-hour clock violently, completely consumed Tavon's entirely pathetic, panicked existence. He aggressively, desperately tried calling absolutely every single major commercial bank in the entire busy city of Atlanta. But the incredibly ruthless financial news had already violently, aggressively spread like wild, fast-burning fire. The elite, highly connected banking executives rapidly, aggressively slammed their heavy wooden doors directly in his sweating, terrified face. They absolutely, completely refused to lend a single tiny dime to an incredibly reckless, arrogant boy who had just publicly humiliated himself on a massive, grand corporate stage. Kiara frantically called all her wealthy, highly influential social media sponsors, desperately begging for a rapid, massive cash advance. But the incredibly ruthless luxury brands immediately dropped her lucrative contracts the exact second they fully realized she was completely personally liable for a massive, catastrophic $45 million debt. Her fake, glamorous plastic world violently, completely shattered, leaving her totally, absolutely alone and completely, entirely broke. By Thursday late afternoon, the sheer, unadulterated terror had officially aggressively mutated into pure, absolute desperation. The massive, beautiful Buckhead mansion felt incredibly cold and terribly empty as they rapidly, aggressively realized they were about to violently, completely lose absolutely everything they selfishly, greedily loved. I sat peacefully, calmly inside my new temporary modest office, watching the digital bank clock slowly, deliberately tick perfectly down. Jamal smoothly handed me a steaming hot cup of fresh black coffee, his sharp dark eyes gleaming with intense, absolute predatory satisfaction as we quietly, proudly monitored their rapid, total financial execution, unfolding flawlessly, exactly according to my brilliant, heavy master plan today, right now. The arrogant heirs were totally out of options. They foolishly thought they were completely invincible, untouchable kings, but they were just pathetic little pawns trapped beautifully inside my grand, intricate game. The crushing, heavy pressure of the looming, strict deadline violently suffocated their fragile, greedy minds, leaving them gasping desperately for merciful air. Their glorious downfall was finally, beautifully, entirely complete today, right now, forever. The heavy mahogany doors glided shut firmly behind my back, sealing Tavin and Kiara inside their spectacular, newly acquired nightmare. The 48 hours that followed my explosive penthouse boardroom revelation were an absolute masterclass in rapid financial devastation. Tavin practically tore the city of Atlanta apart, desperately searching for an emergency corporate bailout. He aggressively stormed into the sleek glass lobbies of every major commercial bank in the metropolitan area, demanding urgent meetings with elite loan officers he used to arrogantly dismiss. But the ruthless financial news had already spread through the elite black business community with terrifying lightning speed. Banking executives who previously smiled and eagerly shook his hand now instructed their private security guards to permanently block him from entering their prestigious buildings. They completely refused to lend a single red cent to an incredibly reckless heir who had just publicly humiliated himself and ruined his father's pristine corporate legacy on camera. Tavin burned up his phone, constantly calling private wealth funds, desperate angel investors, and even shady hard money lenders, offering absolutely outrageous interest rates. Every single call ended in a harsh, immediate rejection. His once powerful, influential name was now completely synonymous with total financial toxicity forever. Kiara experienced her own brutal downfall simultaneously. Her entire fake, glamorous digital world violently shattered the exact second the explosive boardroom footage leaked onto social media. The ruthless luxury brands that previously sponsored her lavish lifestyle abruptly terminated all her lucrative contracts. Her top-tier management agency sent a cold, swift email officially severing their professional relationship. They realized she was completely personally liable for a catastrophic $45 million debt, and they swiftly ran for the hills. Kiara frantically posted a tearful, heavily filtered video, desperately begging her audience for sympathy and immediate crowdfunding support. The brutal online backlash was incredibly swift and absolutely merciless. Thousands of furious commenters mercilessly dragged her for cruelly evicting her grieving stepmother while flaunting stolen corporate wealth. By Thursday evening, her pristine digital empire was completely reduced to absolute pathetic ruins. She was left alone sitting inside a massive mansion she no longer truly owned, crying over unpaid designer bills and shattered illusions of unearned grandeur. Friday afternoon arrived, bringing the heavy, suffocating weight of my final deadline. At exactly 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the heavy glass doors of my modest South Atlanta office slowly swung open. Tavin and Kiara nervously shuffled inside, looking entirely unrecognizable from the arrogant, pristine heirs who had confidently strutted into the penthouse boardroom just 2 days prior. Tavon's expensive custom-tailored suit looked severely wrinkled, and he carried heavy dark bags under his bloodshot, panicking eyes. Kiara wore plain, oversized sweatpants and cheap dark sunglasses, desperately attempting to hide her incredibly swollen face. They completely lacked any trace of their former toxic arrogance. They looked exactly like terrified, defeated children who had finally been caught executing an irreversible crime. Jamal and Nia stood fiercely still behind my desk, their arms tightly crossed as they watched the pathetic broken siblings slowly approach. I remained comfortably seated, calmly reviewing a standard construction contract, refusing to even look up until they stood directly in front of my desk. "Maya, please," Kiara began, her voice cracking heavily with pure desperation. She abruptly removed her dark sunglasses, revealing red, puffy eyes filled with sheer terror. "We are begging you to please reconsider this brutal execution. We will lose absolutely everything we have ever known today. The bank just called and officially threatened to completely drain my personal checking accounts. I will have to immediately move out of Buckhead and sell all my designer bags just to afford cheap groceries. Please, Maya. I am your stepdaughter. You cannot truly do this to your own family. Think about our amazing father. Please just do this for Dad's sake. We were just incredibly foolish and deeply misguided. We are profoundly sorry for everything we did to you. Please just restructure the massive debt and peacefully allow us to quietly keep the primary family mansion. We will hand you back the entire corporate company today." I slowly set my pen down and leaned forward, resting my elbows on the solid wooden desk. I stared directly into Kiara's weeping, terrified eyes, feeling absolutely zero pity or warmth. "Dad explicitly left the entire company to both of you specifically to see if you could truly become strong, responsible leaders," I stated coldly, my voice slicing cleanly through her loud sobs. "Instead, you instantly proved that you were nothing but greedy, selfish parasites. When you aggressively froze my credit cards, locked me out of the banking accounts, and viciously threw me out into the street with nothing but a single suitcase, did you kindly do that for Dad's sake? When you maliciously called my honest, hardworking suppliers and aggressively threatened to permanently ruin my small community business, did you do that out of deep family love? You did not care about family legacy or Dad's honorable memory when you thought you held the executioner's sharp axe." Tavin slammed his shaking hands flat down onto my desk, his voice sounding incredibly hoarse and utterly broken. "We have no money," Maya Tavin pleaded loudly, his arrogant pride completely shattered. "We simply cannot ever pay you $45 million in cash by 5 o'clock today. If you pull the trigger and execute this massive default, you will violently send us both directly into permanent, absolute bankruptcy. You will completely ruin our entire lives forever." I looked at him with a chillingly serene, calm smile. "I am not ruining your lives, Tavon," I replied smoothly, picking my pen back up. "You eagerly ruined your own lives the exact second you completely surrendered to your massive, toxic, blinding greed. You blindly signed the lethal legal documents. You proudly threw the massive, deadly noose directly around your own fragile, arrogant necks. I just simply kicked the small wooden stool out from directly underneath your perfectly polished designer shoes." The heavy, deafening silence stretched agonizingly across the tense office. The large digital clock on my wall slowly clicked forward, ticking relentlessly toward their total doom. Kiara sank down onto her knees, sobbing uncontrollably onto the cheap carpet, while Taven buried his sweating face deeply into his trembling hands. We sat perfectly still in the room, watching the minutes slip quickly away. 4:45, 4:50, 4:55. They sat there completely paralyzed by the horrifying magnitude of their massive impending collapse. At exactly 5 p.m., my secure banking terminal softly chimed, confirming that zero funds had been wired into the Apex Ventures holding account. The strict deadline had officially permanently expired. I slowly looked over at Harrison, who was standing firmly by the door. Harrison gave me a sharp professional nod. "Execute the default, Harrison," I commanded coldly. "Take absolutely everything they own right now today." The highly coordinated federal fallout was breathtakingly swift and incredibly mercilessly brutal. Within exactly 1 hour, a fleet of armed federal marshals aggressively swarmed the towering Glass Legacy Holdings headquarters in downtown Atlanta. They immediately secured the sprawling premises, locking down every executive floor and forcefully seizing all primary corporate assets on behalf of Apex Ventures. Simultaneously, a separate, highly coordinated team of private security agents arrived at the massive, luxurious Buckhead estate. They legally forcefully evicted Kiara from the premium property, giving her exactly 15 minutes to pack a single small duffel bag with basic, cheap clothing. The agents aggressively confiscated her expensive customized sports car right out of the circular driveway, leaving her completely stranded outside the massive iron gates. She stood alone on the wide public sidewalk, frantically screaming at the private guards while they firmly padlocked the large, heavy front doors of the mansion she used to proudly call her own. But the true devastation struck Taven precisely as he walked out of my South Atlanta office building. As he stepped onto the busy sidewalk, a fleet of dark federal vehicles suddenly surrounded him. The IRS and the FBI had officially opened a massive joint criminal investigation into his reckless financial behavior. During the brief 48 hours, he maintained control of the corporate accounts. He illegally embezzled millions to pay for his absurd yacht parties, an attempt to rapidly hide assets from the impending foreclosure. Two federal agents quickly grabbed his arms and forcefully shoved him against the cold metal side of an unmarked government vehicle. The sharp metallic click of the heavy steel handcuffs echoed beautifully across the quiet afternoon street. I sat comfortably inside my black town car parked just a few yards away, watching the entire spectacular scene unfold. I slowly rolled up the dark-tinted window, completely shutting out Tavon's frantic screams, leaving the greedy, broken villains trapped inside their own permanent total devastation today. I leaned back against the plush leather seat, breathing evenly. The ruthless corporate war was finally definitively over. I had unequivocally, completely, utterly won. The 48 hours that followed my explosive boardroom revelation were an absolute masterclass in rapid financial devastation. Taven practically tore the city of Atlanta apart, desperately searching for a massive corporate bailout. He aggressively stormed into the sleek glass lobbies of every major commercial bank in the metropolitan area, demanding emergency meetings with elite loan officers he used to arrogantly dismiss. The incredibly ruthless financial news had already spread through the elite black business community with terrifying speed. Banking executives, who previously smiled and eagerly shook his hand, now firmly instructed their private security guards to permanently block him from entering their prestigious buildings. They completely refused to lend a single red cent to an incredibly reckless heir who had just publicly humiliated himself and completely ruined his father's pristine corporate legacy. Taven aggressively burned up his phone, constantly calling private wealth funds, desperate angel investors, and even shady hard money lenders, offering absolutely outrageous interest rates. Every single call ended in a harsh, immediate rejection. His once powerful, influential name was now completely synonymous with total, absolute financial toxicity forever today, perfectly right now today. Kiara experienced her own brutal, spectacular downfall simultaneously. Her entire fake, glamorous world violently shattered the exact second the explosive boardroom footage leaked onto social media. The incredibly ruthless luxury brands that previously sponsored her lavish lifestyle immediately abruptly terminated all her lucrative contracts. Her top-tier management agency sent a cold, swift email officially severing their professional relationship. They realized she was completely personally liable for a massive, catastrophic $45 million debt, and they swiftly ran for the hills. Kiara frantically posted a tearful, heavily filtered video, desperately begging her massive audience for sympathy and immediate crowdfunding support. The brutal online backlash was incredibly swift and absolutely merciless. Thousands of furious commenters mercilessly dragged her for cruelly evicting her grieving stepmother while shamelessly flaunting stolen corporate wealth. By Thursday evening, her pristine digital empire was entirely reduced to absolute pathetic ruins. She was left completely alone, sitting inside a freezing massive mansion she no longer truly owned, crying over unpaid designer bills and shattered illusions of unearned grandeur today, perfectly forever right now. Friday afternoon arrived, bringing the heavy, suffocating weight of my final absolute deadline. At exactly 3:00 p.m., the heavy glass doors of my new modest South Atlanta office slowly swung open. Tavin and Kiara nervously shuffled inside, looking completely unrecognizable from the arrogant, pristine heirs who had confidently strutted into the penthouse boardroom just 2 days prior. Tavin's expensive custom-tailored suit looked severely wrinkled, and he carried heavy, dark, exhausted bags under his bloodshot, panicking eyes. Kiara wore plain, oversized sweatpants and cheap, dark sunglasses, desperately attempting to hide her incredibly swollen, tear-stained face. They completely lacked any trace of their former toxic supreme arrogance. They looked exactly like terrified, defeated children who had finally been caught executing a massive, irreversible crime. Jamal and Nia stood fiercely, perfectly still behind my desk, their arms tightly crossed as they watched the pathetic, broken siblings slowly approach. I remained comfortably seated, calmly reviewing a standard construction contract, refusing to even look up until they stood completely in front of my desk today, right now, forever, perfectly. Maya, please, Kiara began, her voice cracking heavily with pure, unadulterated desperation. She abruptly removed her dark sunglasses, revealing red, puffy eyes filled with sheer, absolute terror. We are begging you to please reconsider this massive, brutal execution. We will forcefully lose absolutely everything we have ever known today. The bank just called and officially threatened to completely drain my personal checking accounts. I will have to immediately move out of Buckhead and sell all my designer bags just to afford cheap basic groceries. Please, Maya, I am your stepdaughter. You cannot truly do this to your own family. Think about our amazing father. Please just do this for Dad's sake. We were just incredibly foolish and totally deeply misguided. We are profoundly, absolutely sorry for everything we did to you. Please just restructure the massive heavy debt and peacefully allow us to quietly keep the primary family mansion. We will hand you back the entire corporate company today, right now, perfectly forever right now. I slowly set my pen down and leaned firmly forward, resting my elbows on the solid wooden desk. I stared directly into Kiara's weeping, terrified eyes, feeling absolutely zero pity or maternal warmth. Dad explicitly left the entire company to both of you specifically, to see if you could truly become strong, responsible leaders, I stated coldly, my voice slicing sharply, cleanly through her pathetic, loud sobs. Instead, you immediately proved that you were nothing but greedy, selfish parasites. When you aggressively froze my personal credit cards, locked me entirely out of the banking accounts, and viciously threw me out into the cold street with nothing but a single suitcase. Did you kindly do that for Dad's sake? When you maliciously called my honest, hardworking suppliers and aggressively threatened to permanently ruin my small community business? Did you compassionately do that out of deep family love? You did not care about family legacy or Dad's honorable memory when you thought you held the executioner's massive sharp axe today, entirely perfectly forever right now today. Tavin aggressively slammed his shaking hands flat down onto my desk, his voice sounding incredibly hoarse and utterly broken. We have absolutely no money. Maya Tavin pleaded loudly, his arrogant pride entirely shattered. We simply cannot ever possibly pay you $45 million in cash by 5 o'clock today. If you aggressively pull the trigger and forcefully execute this massive severe default, you will violently send us both directly into permanent absolute total bankruptcy. You will completely permanently ruin our entire lives forever. I looked at him with a chillingly serene, perfectly calm smile. I am not aggressively ruining your lives, Tavon, I replied smoothly, picking my pen back up. You aggressively, eagerly ruined your own lives the exact second you completely surrendered to your own massive, toxic, blinding greed. You blindly, happily signed the lethal legal documents. You happily, proudly threw the massive, deadly noose directly around your own fragile, arrogant necks. I just simply peacefully kicked the small wooden stool out from directly underneath your perfectly polished designer shoes today, right now, forever. The incredibly heavy, deafening silence stretched agonizingly across the tense, quiet office. The large digital clock on my wall slowly, deliberately clicked forward, ticking relentlessly toward their absolute total doom. Kiara sank heavily down onto her knees, sobbing uncontrollably onto the cheap carpet, while Tavin buried his sweating face deeply into his trembling hands. We sat perfectly still in the room, watching the minutes slip violently, quickly away. 4:45, 4:50, 4:55. They both sat there completely paralyzed by the sheer horrifying magnitude of their massive impending collapse. At exactly 5 o'clock p.m., my secure banking terminal softly chimed, confirming that zero funds had been successfully wired into the Apex Ventures master holding account. The strict, rigid deadline had officially permanently expired. I slowly looked over at Harrison, who was standing firmly, confidently by the door. Harrison gave me a sharp, serious, professional nod. Execute the default, Harrison, I commanded coldly. Take absolutely, completely everything they own right now today. The highly coordinated legal and federal fallout was absolutely breathtakingly swift and incredibly mercilessly brutal. Within exactly 1 hour, a large fleet of heavily armed federal marshals aggressively swarmed the towering Glass Legacy Holdings headquarters in downtown Atlanta. They immediately secured the entire sprawling premises, locking down every single executive floor and forcefully seizing all primary corporate assets on behalf of Apex Ventures. Simultaneously, a separate, highly coordinated team of stern private security agents arrived directly at the massive, luxurious Buckhead estate. They legally forcefully evicted Kiara from the sprawling premium property, giving her exactly 15 minutes to pack a single small duffel bag with basic cheap clothing. The agents firmly, aggressively confiscated her expensive, customized imported sports car right out of the circular driveway, leaving her completely stranded outside the massive iron gates. She stood alone on the wide public sidewalk, frantically screaming aggressively at the private guards while they firmly padlocked the large, heavy front doors of the mansion she used to proudly, arrogantly call her own today, forever, entirely, perfectly, right now, today, forever, perfectly. But the absolute, true, ultimate devastation struck Taven precisely as he miserably walked out of my South Atlanta office building. As he slowly stepped onto the warm, busy sidewalk, a fleet of dark black federal vehicles suddenly aggressively surrounded him. The IRS and the FBI had officially opened a massive, aggressive joint criminal investigation into his incredibly reckless financial behavior. During the brief 48 hours, he had temporarily maintained total absolute control of the corporate accounts he had foolishly, illegally embezzled millions. The sharp metallic click of handcuffs echoed incredibly beautifully today. Exactly 1 year later, the warm, brilliant Georgia sun shone brightly over a massive, newly renovated commercial campus in the heart of South Atlanta. The vibrant, energetic atmosphere was absolutely electric, filled with the joyful sounds of a thriving local community finally reclaiming its rightful economic power. I stood proudly on the wide concrete steps of the newly established Desmond Community Business Incubator, holding a pair of oversized golden ceremonial scissors firmly, tightly, beautifully in my strong, steady, confident hands. This sprawling state-of-the-art facility was specifically designed to rapidly accelerate young, brilliant African American entrepreneurs, providing them with the vital capital and premium resources they truly needed to succeed, without facing predatory lenders ever again, completely forever today. The massive, excited crowd gathered on the fresh green lawn broke into thunderous, enthusiastic applause as I smoothly sliced through the thick, bright red ribbon, officially opening the heavy glass doors to the public. Nia and Jamal stood firmly right by my side, beaming with immense, fierce, protective pride, smiling happily today. They were no longer just my loyal, supportive family members during a bitter corporate war. They were now my highly respected managing partners at the newly restructured Legacy Holdings, fully helping me steer the massive commercial real estate empire toward unprecedented historic financial growth today. Beautifully, permanently, wonderfully, always forever, completely successfully right now today, standing flawlessly, victoriously together, building generational wealth, powerfully, aggressively, forever, entirely, gracefully, purposefully, peacefully, perfectly today. Right now, forever, always, completely today. The highly emotional journey to reach this glorious, triumphant morning had been incredibly challenging, but profoundly, deeply satisfying in every single absolute way. After legally officially seizing total absolute control of the entire corporate portfolio, I immediately initiated a massive, comprehensive internal restructuring. The very first executive action I proudly took was tracking down every single veteran Black employee that Tavon had arrogantly, ruthlessly fired during his short, disastrous reign. I personally called the dedicated project managers, the hardworking maintenance supervisors, and the brilliant financial analysts who had loyally helped my late husband build his legacy from the literal dirt up. I did not just offer them their old jobs back with full back pay and reinstated premium healthcare benefits immediately. I officially restructured the entire corporate hierarchy and granted them actual highly valuable equity in the massive prestigious company today. They were no longer just expendable employees working for a wealthy, privileged elite family. They were now proud official stakeholders, actively owning a vital piece of the very empire they had tirelessly helped construct over decades of brutal sweat and heavy sacrifice. The corporate morale completely transformed overnight, instantly shifting from a toxic culture of absolute fear into a powerful, unified force of unbreakable corporate solidarity. Perfectly right now, forever today, building community, strongly, flawlessly, forever, entirely, beautifully, peacefully, deliberately, carefully, intentionally, wonderfully, gracefully, masterfully, expertly, brilliantly, aggressively, continuously, proudly, happily, completely, victoriously, magnificently, effortlessly, continuously today, right now, forever, always, completely today, perfectly, right now, forever, always today. Meanwhile, the ruthless, brutal consequences of unchecked toxic greed fully caught up with the arrogant heirs who had viciously tried to destroy me completely. Tavon's highly publicized federal trial was a spectacular media circus that thoroughly exposed the absolute depths of his extreme, reckless arrogance forever. The federal prosecutors easily proved he had aggressively embezzled millions of corporate dollars directly into his personal offshore accounts during his brief, disastrous 48 hours of total control. He was officially formally sentenced to 5 hard, brutal years in a high-security federal penitentiary, completely stripped of his tailored designer silk suits and his unearned, bloated elite status. He now spends his long, miserable days physically sweeping the cold concrete floors of a loud, crowded prison cafeteria. A far cry from the luxurious, expensive yacht parties he selfishly thought he entirely deserved every single day of his miserable life right now. The incredibly wealthy elite, Atlanta business community, completely, totally, permanently erased his toxic, arrogant name from their prestigious, exclusive circles, ensuring he would never, ever comfortably work in commercial real estate ever again today, perfectly, forever, absolutely, definitively, completely, permanently, right now today, forever, effortlessly, smoothly, entirely, effectively, thoroughly, beautifully, completely, definitively, absolutely, positively, forever, right now today, continuously, aggressively, wonderfully, flawlessly, perfectly, peacefully, intentionally, expertly, masterfully, brilliantly, proudly, happily, victoriously, strongly, beautifully, magnificently, continuously, entirely, flawlessly, effectively, permanently, completely, deliberately, forever, always right now today, absolutely, completely, perfectly, entirely forever today, forever exactly right now, always completely forever today, right now. Kiara experienced a similarly devastating permanent reality check that completely violently shattered her shallow plastic world entirely forever. With her massive personal assets legally seized to fully pay the colossal $45 million commercial debt, she was forcefully permanently evicted from the glamorous Buckhead socialite scene forever. Her wealthy elite fiancé immediately abruptly canceled their lavish upcoming wedding the exact second he realized she was entirely, completely, desperately broke. Banned permanently from all major social media platforms due to her numerous unhinged public meltdowns and extensive unpaid promotional debts. Kiara now works a grueling, demanding minimum wage retail job at a cheap discount clothing store in the distant rural suburbs. She spends her long, miserable, tiring shifts folding cheap synthetic sweaters, perfectly blending into the exact same working-class background she used to continuously, ruthlessly mock every single day. She must aggressively take public transportation, completely, totally losing the customized imported sports cars she once proudly, arrogantly flaunted. They both learned the incredibly hard, brutally painful way that unearned privilege provides absolutely zero protection when you intentionally, deliberately, aggressively try to permanently, completely destroy the absolutely wrong woman, completely today, forever right now, exactly, perfectly, forever, entirely, always, beautifully, gracefully, entirely, flawlessly, magnificently, effectively, purposefully, thoroughly, actively, completely, definitely, absolutely, positively, always, forever today, continuously, wonderfully, proudly, peacefully, deliberately, intentionally, expertly, brilliantly, victoriously, strongly, fiercely, fiercely, permanently, completely, totally, entirely, perfectly, forever today, absolutely right now, exactly, effectively, smoothly, wonderfully, forever today, completely, permanently, forever, right now today, always. I peacefully stepped slowly away from the cheering, loud, joyful crowd, taking a quiet, peaceful moment for myself entirely, near the beautiful bronze memorial plaque dedicated entirely completely to Desmond. I lovingly ran my soft fingers gently over his heavily engraved name, feeling a profound, overwhelming sense of total, absolute, permanent closure today. They aggressively, selfishly, desperately wanted to permanently bury me deep in the cold dirt, I thought quietly to myself, a calm, chillingly serene smile spreading smoothly across my beautiful face. They fiercely wanted to humiliate me, completely strip me of my absolute dignity, and aggressively erase my entire existence from this prestigious, wealthy family legacy forever. But they were entirely too blinded by their own massive, toxic entitlement to clearly realize the actual profound truth. They did not realize I was the solid, heavy, strong concrete foundation physically holding their entire fragile, transparent glass house up completely. When you aggressively, forcefully, permanently remove the strong, solid foundation, the massive, heavy house does not magically, miraculously, comfortably float. It violently, rapidly, spectacularly collapses directly, heavily onto your arrogant head, burying you permanently, completely inside your own toxic, broken rubble forever today, right now, perfectly, entirely, gracefully, flawlessly, beautifully, completely, definitively, forever, always, wonderfully, purposefully, effectively, permanently, totally, absolutely, deeply, entirely, peacefully, successfully, victoriously, fiercely, strongly, masterfully, expertly, intentionally, deliberately, proudly, happily, continuously, wonderfully, completely, exactly forever today, absolutely right now, always completely, permanently, forever, exactly, perfectly, smoothly, beautifully, flawlessly, entirely, permanently, today, forever, completely, forever, today, right now. Have you ever had to step completely back and willingly hand your bitter, greedy, toxic enemies exactly what they aggressively, loudly, arrogantly asked for, just to peacefully, quietly watch them beautifully, entirely destroy themselves permanently with it today? The absolute greatest, most deeply satisfying revenge in life is not loudly fighting or aggressively screaming to fiercely, actively defend your personal honor. The truest, most powerful, permanent revenge is simply stepping gracefully aside and silently, beautifully, letting the toxic garbage permanently, legally take itself out, completely, without ever lifting a single physical finger ever again. Let me know your incredible, powerful personal story in the comment section directly below today, right now. Do not ever forget to proudly like, subscribe, and actively share this powerful video if you truly, deeply, firmly believe in the absolute flawless execution of swift, undeniable, permanent karma in the real, authentic, beautiful, physical, tangible world today. See you in the next one today, right now, perfectly, forever, always, absolutely, definitely, beautifully, permanently, forever today, right now, exactly, flawlessly, successfully, gracefully, continuously, effectively, proudly, peacefully, strongly, fiercely, wonderfully, perfectly, completely, permanently, today, always, forever, exactly right now, beautifully, forever, entirely, absolutely, completely, successfully, victoriously, masterfully, expertly, deliberately, intentionally, wonderfully, flawlessly, completely, effectively, thoroughly, actively, positively, firmly, genuinely, authentically, permanently, completely, exactly today, forever right now, absolutely always, perfectly, permanently, completely, forever today, right now, exactly, flawlessly, beautifully, strongly, completely today, forever right now, exactly, perfectly, permanently, entirely, forever today, perfectly right now, exactly today, forever, completely, always.